Sometimes the hardest journey is the one that takes you back home. For 58-year-old Shane Bellamy, that journey meant returning to his father's abandoned Texas farm with nothing but his German shepherd Duke and a heart full of regret. His father had passed, and Shane came back to settle things, but his family met him with cold stares and whispered accusations at the funeral, treating him like a stranger who'd betrayed them all. While clearing the overgrown land alone, Shane discovered something his father had buried and sealed away, an iron hatch hidden beneath decades of rust and soil. The more he dug, the clearer it became. Their hatred wasn't about him leaving 30 years ago. It was about what he might find if he ever came back. What was his father hiding all those years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Texas sun beat down on Shane Bellamy's truck as he pulled through the rusted gate of his father's property for the first time in 3 decades. Dust rose from the gravel drive in thin clouds, settling on the windshield like a veil over memories he'd spent half his life trying to forget. Duke sat in the passenger seat, ears perked forward, sensing his owner's tension. The German shepherd had been Shane's constant companion for the past 6 years, ever since the divorce had left him alone in a Dallas apartment that never quite felt like home. The farmhouse stood exactly as Shane remembered it, a single-story structure with peeling white paint and a sagging front porch. The land around it told a different story. What had once been a working farm with cleared fields and maintained fences now looked like something nature had decided to reclaim. Mesquite and brush choked the fence lines. Old machinery rusted in places where it had been abandoned, slowly being swallowed by weeds and creeping vines. Shane cut the engine and sat for a moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. He was 58 years old, a construction foreman with calloused hands and a bad knee that ached when rain was coming. His hair had gone mostly grey, though he kept it short in the same military style he'd worn since his 20s. The face, looking back at him in the rearview mirror, was weathered, lined with years of outdoor work and decisions he couldn't take back. Duke whined softly, nudging Shane's arm with his nose. "I know, boy," Shane said quietly. "We're here. Let's get this over with." The funeral had been 2 days ago, at the First Baptist Church in town, the same church where Shane had been baptized as a boy. He'd driven down from Dallas that morning, arriving just as the service was starting. The moment he walked through those doors, he felt the weight of every eye in the room turn toward him. His father's siblings, Uncle Carl, Aunt Diane, and Uncle Robert, sat in the front pew with their families. Not one of them had acknowledged Shane's presence. Not one had offered a handshake or a word of condolence. Carl was the oldest, a retired feed store owner with a permanently pinched expression and eyes that seemed to judge everything they looked at. Diane had married a banker and never let anyone forget it, always dressed just a touch too formally for whatever occasion she attended. Robert, the youngest of his father's siblings, had been the gentlest once, but time and his siblings' influence had hardened him too. Shane had taken a seat in the back, listening to the preacher talk about Raymond Bellamy as if he'd known him. "A man of strong principles," the preacher had said, "a man who kept his own counsel and lived by his convictions." Shane had wondered what convictions those were. His father had been a silent man, built from the same hard Texas soil he'd worked. Conversations with Raymond had always been brief, functional exchanges about chores or weather, never about feelings or dreams or the kind of things that might have built a bridge between father and son. After the service, Shane had stood by his truck in the church parking lot, watching people file out. His cousin Melissa, Carl's daughter, had glanced his way with something that might have been sympathy, but her father's sharp look had turned her away before she could approach. Diane had walked past close enough that Shane could have reached out and touched her sleeve, but she'd looked straight ahead, as if he were invisible. Only Robert had paused, just for a moment, and in that pause, Shane had seen something complicated in his uncle's eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. Now, Standing on the property where he'd spent his first 18 years, Shane felt like an intruder in his own history. He pulled his father's worn work gloves from the truck's glove compartment. They'd been there when he cleaned out Raymond's vehicle at the impound lot, still shaped to his father's hands, still smelling faintly of motor oil and earth. Shane held them for a moment, studying the cracked leather, the permanent stains, the way the fingers curved slightly inward as if still gripping something. He'd left this place at 28, not 18 like he'd always planned. Those 10 extra years had been spent trying to earn his father's approval, working the land beside Raymond in a silence that grew heavier with each passing season. Finally, Shane had accepted that approval would never come. He'd packed a single duffel bag, driven to Dallas, and started over. Met a woman named Carol, married her within a year, had a daughter they named Emma. The marriage had lasted 15 years before Carol decided she wanted something different, someone different. The divorce had been civil enough, but it had taken Emma with it. His daughter was 24 now, living in Houston, working in marketing for a tech company Shane didn't fully understand. They talked maybe once a month, stilted conversations where both of them seemed to be reading from scripts. She'd been 12 when he and Carol split, old enough to feel abandoned, young enough to believe her mother's version of events. Shane had called Emma after the funeral, standing in the parking lot of a truck stop halfway back to Dallas. "Hey, Dad," she'd answered, her voice neutral. "Your grandfather passed," Shane had said, realizing he should have led with something else. "I know," Aunt Carol told me. Carol still kept in touch with Shane's family, somehow maintaining connections he'd never managed to forge. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. The funeral was today." Silence on the line then. Was it hard? Shane had looked up at the darkening sky, watching a plane's lights blink across the stars. "They didn't want me there, Em. But that's not new." "I'm sorry, Dad. He left me the farm, everything on it. The lawyer said I'm the sole heir." Another pause. "What are you going to do with it?" "Sell it, I guess. Need to clear it first. Place is a mess." "When are you going back to Dallas?" "I don't know yet. Maybe a week or two, depends on how much work needs doing." "Okay." Emma had sounded distant, distracted. "Well, let me know if you need anything." But she'd already said goodbye and ended the call. Now Shane stood on the sagging porch, Duke pressed against his leg. The front door wasn't locked. It probably hadn't been locked in years. Inside, the house smelled of dust and stale air and something else, the particular scent of absence, of a life that had stopped. Everything was exactly as Raymond had left it. A coffee cup sat on the kitchen counter, a dark ring staining the bottom. The newspaper on the table was dated 3 weeks ago, folded to the obituaries. Shane moved through the rooms like a ghost, visiting scenes from someone else's life. The living room held a worn recliner positioned in front of an old television. The walls were bare, except for a single photograph of Shane's mother, dead now for 25 years. She looked young in the picture, younger than Shane was now, smiling at the camera with an openness his father had never shown. In the bedroom, Raymond's clothes still hung in the closet. Work shirts, all the same style, jeans stacked on a shelf, a jacket Shane remembered from his childhood. On the nightstand sat a pair of reading glasses and a Bible so worn the spine had cracked. Shane picked up the Bible, flipped through pages marked with strips of paper. Most of the marked passages were from the Old Testament, Job, Ecclesiastes, passages about suffering and endurance. He set the Bible down and returned to the kitchen. Duke had found the water bowl Raymond must have kept for the occasional stray that wandered onto the property. Shane filled it from the tap, the pipes groaning and spitting before the water ran clear. He filled a bowl for himself and drank, tasting iron and minerals. The refrigerator held almost nothing, some condiments, a half-empty carton of milk, long since spoiled, a few beer bottles. Shane opened one of the beers and carried it out to the porch. The sun was setting now, painting the western sky in shades of orange and deep red. He sat on the porch steps, Duke settling beside him, and looked out over the property. 60 acres of Texas scrubland, most of it unusable for anything except grazing cattle his father had never owned. The barn stood about 100 yards from the house, its roof partially collapsed on one side. Beyond that, scattered equipment marked the landscape like monuments to abandoned ambition. An old tractor without tires, a plough half buried in dirt, sections of fence that had fallen and never been repaired. Shane took a long drink of the beer, warm and bitter. He'd need at least 2 weeks to clear this place enough to sell it. Maybe 3. The construction company would give him the time they always did when it was family business. He had savings to cover expenses. The real question was whether he had the emotional stamina to spend that much time here, surrounded by silence and memory. That night, Shane slept in his old bedroom. The bed was still there, the same mattress he'd slept on as a teenager. Duke curled up on the floor beside him, and Shane lay awake for a long time, listening to the house settle, the wind moving through gaps in the siding, the distant cry of a coyote. He thought about Emma, wondered what she was doing. Probably out with friends, living the kind of life he'd never been able to give her. He thought about Carol, who'd once told him he was emotionally unavailable, whatever that meant. Mostly he thought about his father, trying to remember a single conversation that had felt real, that had bridged the gap between them. Nothing came to mind. The next morning, Shane woke at dawn to Duke's cold nose pressed against his hand. He made coffee in Raymond's old percolator, standing at the kitchen window and watching the sun rise over land that was now his, at least temporarily. The coffee was strong and bitter, the way his father had always made it. After breakfast, eggs scrambled in an iron skillet he found hanging from a hook, Shane began his survey of the property. He started with the barn, pulling open the large sliding door that hung crooked on its rails. Inside, the morning light filtered through gaps in the walls, illuminating decades of accumulated junk. Old tools, their handles cracked and grey, coils of wire, empty feed sacks, a workbench covered in dust and the dried bodies of insects. Shane began sorting through it methodically, making piles. What could be salvaged and sold, what was pure junk, what might have value to someone, somewhere. In an old toolbox, he found the photograph. It was tucked between layers of oily rags, protected by a plastic bag that had yellowed with age. The photograph showed 4 men standing in front of this very barn. Shane recognized his father immediately. Raymond looked younger, maybe in his late 20s, his face harder than Shane remembered from childhood. The other 3 men were strangers. They stood with the kind of bearing Shane associated with military service, straight-backed and serious. All 4 wore work clothes, jeans and flannel shirts, but something about their posture suggested they were posing for more than just a casual snapshot. Shane turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded pencil, August 1971. He studied the image more carefully. His father would have been about 30 then. Shane hadn't been born yet. He'd arrived in 1967, which meant he would have been 4 years old when this was taken. He tried to place the other men, searching his memory for faces he might have seen at family gatherings or around town. Nothing surfaced. Duke barked from outside, a sharp warning bark that brought Shane out of his thoughts. He pocketed the photograph and stepped out of the barn to find Duke standing rigid, focused on something beyond the fence line. Shane followed the dog's gaze, but saw nothing except brush and the shimmer of heat already rising from the ground. "Easy, boy," Shane said, resting a hand on Duke's head. "Probably just a rabbit." But Duke remained tense, unconvinced. Shane spent the rest of the morning clearing brush from around the house, cutting back mesquite that had grown wild. The work was hot and monotonous, the kind of physical labor that left his mind free to wander. He kept thinking about the photograph, about the date, 1971. What had his father been doing then? What had brought those men together? By midday, Shane was soaked with sweat and ready for a break. He drove into town, a 15-minute trip down a 2-lane highway to pick up supplies. The town had changed less than he'd expected. Same main street, same hardware store, same diner where he'd eaten lunch with his high school girlfriend a lifetime ago. He bought work gloves, garbage bags, some fence posts and wire, and a case of water bottles. At the checkout, the clerk, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a bun, gave him a long look. "You're Raymond Bellamy's boy," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. Heard you were back, cleaning up the place, planning to sell it." She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Your father was a good man, kept to himself, but that's not a crime." Shane wanted to ask what she meant by that, what she knew about his father that he didn't, but she'd already turned her attention to the next customer. He loaded his supplies into the truck and drove back to the farm, the clerk's words echoing in his mind. Kept to himself. That was one way to describe it. Another way would be to say Raymond had built walls so high no one could see over them, not even his own son. That evening, Shane tried calling Emma again. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. "Hey, sweetheart, it's Dad. Just checking in. Hope work's going well. I'm making progress here on the farm." He paused, unsure what to say. "It's strange being back. Anyway, call me when you can. Love you." He ended the call and sat on the porch steps, watching the sun set again. Duke lay beside him, calm now, the earlier tension forgotten. The land stretched out in all directions, empty and quiet. Shane had spent most of his adult life in cities, surrounded by noise and people and the constant hum of activity. This silence was something different. It wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive, heavy with things unsaid and questions unasked. On his 3rd day at the farm, Shane began working on the area behind the barn where his father had kept most of the old equipment. A rusted tractor chassis sat half sunken into the earth, surrounded by weeds that had grown taller than a man. Shane started cutting them back with a machete he'd found in the barn, working in a widening circle around the chassis. Duke had been exploring the property, following scent trails only he could detect. Suddenly he appeared at Shane's side, whining and pawing at the ground near a section covered with old sheet metal and rotted boards. "What is it, boy?" Shane set down the machete and approached. Duke pawed more insistently at the metal, his whining becoming more urgent. Shane grabbed the edge of the sheet metal and pulled. It came away easily, so rusted it practically crumbled in his hands. Beneath it, more boards, these ones deliberately placed, he could tell. They were arranged in a pattern, covering something. Shane cleared away the boards one by one, revealing bare earth that looked disturbed, different from the soil around it. He knelt and began digging with his hands, then went to get a shovel. 20 minutes of careful excavation revealed what Duke had found. An iron hatch set into a concrete frame, about 3 feet square. Shane sat back on his heels, staring at his discovery. The hatch was old, the iron rusted but still solid. Heavy bolts secured it at each corner, and along one edge, Shane could see what looked like a lock mechanism built into the frame itself. Someone had gone to significant effort to seal this thing and then hide it beneath layers of metal and wood. His first thought was that it might be a storm shelter, though he'd never heard his father mention one. His second thought was darker. What if it was something else? What if his father had buried something he didn't want found? Shane tried the bolts, but they were seized with rust. He'd need penetrating oil and better tools. He stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, and looked around. The placement wasn't random. This was far enough from the house and barn that casual visitors wouldn't stumble across it, but close enough to access regularly if needed. He was about to cover it back up temporarily when he heard a vehicle approaching. Shane walked around the barn to see a dusty pickup pulling into the driveway. Uncle Carl climbed out, moving with the stiff gait of a man whose body had started to fail him. He was 73 now, Shane calculated. Still driving, still apparently keeping an eye on things. "Shane," Carl said by way of greeting. His voice carried no warmth. "Uncle Carl." Shane kept his own voice neutral. Carl looked past Shane toward the area behind the barn. "What are you doing back there?" "Clearing junk, getting ready to sell." "That's so." Carl's eyes narrowed. "Find anything interesting?" The question was too pointed to be casual. Shane made a decision in that moment, a decision that would change everything that followed. "Just old equipment." "Why?" Carl held his gaze for a long moment. "Your father had his ways of doing things. Some things he meant to stay buried." "What things?" "Past things. Family business." Carl shifted his weight, and Shane saw something in his uncle's face he hadn't expected. Fear. "You'd be smart to clear what needs clearing and move on. Don't go digging into matters that don't concern you." Shane felt his jaw tighten. "This is my property now. Everything on it concerns me. Is that right?" Carl's expression hardened. "Your father spent 30 years keeping certain matters private. He had his reasons. Good reasons. You think showing up after all this time gives you the right to what?" Shane stepped closer. "To know the truth about my own father?" Carl's face flushed red. "The truth. You want the truth, boy. The truth is your father did what he had to do, what needed doing, and we all stood by him because it was the right thing. You weren't here. You don't get to judge." "I'm not judging anyone. I just want to understand. Some doors shouldn't be opened, Shane. Your daddy knew that. Now I'm telling you the same." Carl turned back toward his truck, then paused. "Leave things buried, for your own good." He climbed into his truck and drove away, leaving Shane standing in a cloud of dust, Duke pressed against his leg. The dog could sense his tension, the questions churning through his mind. Carl's reaction had confirmed what Shane already suspected. The hatch wasn't just an old storm shelter. It was something more, something the family knew about, something they wanted to keep hidden, and that meant Shane had to open it. He spent the rest of the afternoon gathering tools and supplies, penetrating oil, which he applied liberally to each bolt, a heavy-duty wrench, a crowbar in case he needed leverage. He worked methodically, letting the oil seep into the rusted threads while he cleared more of the area around the hatch, revealing the full concrete frame. As the sun began to set, Shane sat on the ground beside his discovery and pulled out the photograph he'd found in the barn. August 1971. 4 men with serious faces, his father and 3 strangers. He studied each face, committing them to memory, wondering which of them, if any, knew about what was buried here. That night, Shane couldn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the house creak and settle, thinking about Carl's words. Your father did what he had to do. What did that mean? What had Raymond done that required such secrecy? Such defensive anger from a brother who'd always seemed disapproving but never genuinely hostile? At some point, Shane must have dozed off because he woke to Duke's low growl. The room was dark, the clock on the nightstand reading 2:47 a.m. Duke stood at the window, his attention fixed on something outside. Shane got out of bed and moved to the window. For a moment, he saw nothing but darkness and the faint shapes of the barn and fence line. Then, movement. A light, brief and distant, sweeping across the area behind the barn where he'd found the hatch. Someone was out there. Shane grabbed his jeans and pulled them on, then found the flashlight he'd left on the dresser. He didn't turn it on. Instead, he moved quietly through the dark house, Duke at his heels. The front door creaked when he opened it, and Shane froze, listening. The light behind the barn had gone out. He waited, counting heartbeats, then moved off the porch and around the side of the house. The night was cool, a light breeze carrying the scent of dry grass and dust. Shane approached the barn slowly, every sense alert. Duke stayed close, silent now, his body tense. Behind the barn, Shane found nothing. No vehicle, no person, no sign anyone had been there, except he knelt and examined the ground near the hatch. fresh boot prints in the dirt, not his own. Someone had been here, had seen what he'd uncovered. Shane sat down heavily on the ground, his heart pounding. The family was watching him. They knew he'd found the hatch, and they were worried about what he'd discover when he opened it. Which meant whatever was down there was significant enough to monitor, to protect, to keep secret even now, years after his father's death. He looked up at the stars, brilliant in the dark Texas sky, and made a promise to himself. Tomorrow he was opening that hatch. Whatever his father had buried, whatever the family was trying to protect, Shane was going to find out the truth. Duke whined softly and pressed his nose against Shane's hand. "I know, boy," Shane whispered. "I know." The morning sun was already hot when Shane returned to the hatch with his tools and a determination that felt almost physical, like a weight pressing against his chest. He'd spent the hours after discovering the boot prints, checking the property, looking for any other signs of intrusion. He'd found tire tracks near the back fence line, fresh enough that they couldn't have been there more than a day or two. Someone had parked there, walked to the hatch, and left. The family was definitely watching. Shane applied more penetrating oil to the bolts, working each one carefully with the wrench. The first bolt fought him for 20 minutes before finally breaking free with a screech of protesting metal. The second came easier. By the time he'd removed the third, sweat was dripping into his eyes, despite the bandana he'd tied around his forehead. Duke lay in the shade of the barn, watching his master work. Every so often the dog would lift his head, ears swiveling toward sounds Shane couldn't hear. The property felt different this morning, charged with possibility and dread in equal measure. The fourth and final bolt surrendered just before noon. Shane set down his wrench and examined the hatch more closely. The lock mechanism Carl had mentioned was indeed built into the frame, a heavy sliding bolt on the inside that would have made the hatch impossible to open from the outside once secured. But there was something else. A secondary latch that Shane could see through a gap in the seal. He worked the crowbar into the gap and applied steady pressure. Metal groaned. The seal, which had held for decades, began to give way. Shane repositioned the crowbar and tried again. This time something inside the mechanism gave way with a sharp crack. The hatch lifted an inch. Shane set aside the crowbar and gripped the edge of the hatch with both hands. He pulled, muscles straining, and the hatch swung open on hinges so rusted they screamed in protest. A wave of stale, cold air rushed out, carrying with it the smell of concrete and earth and something else, something organic and long settled. Shane peered into the darkness below. A ladder, metal rungs built into the concrete wall, descended into blackness. He couldn't see the bottom. He retrieved his high-powered flashlight from his toolkit and shone it down. The beam revealed a chamber roughly 12 feet deep, opening into what appeared to be a larger space. For a moment, Shane hesitated. This was the threshold Carl had warned him not to cross. Whatever lay below had been deliberately hidden, sealed away by his father for reasons Shane still didn't understand. Opening the hatch was one thing. Descending into whatever his father had built down there was something else entirely. Duke appeared at his side, whining softly. "Stay here, boy," Shane said. He sat on the edge of the opening, his legs dangling into the darkness, and began his descent. The ladder was solid despite its age. Shane tested each rung before putting his full weight on it, the flashlight gripped awkwardly in one hand. The air grew colder as he descended, and with each downward step he felt as though he were traveling backward through time into a part of his father's life that had been deliberately locked away from the world above. His feet touched solid ground. Shane swept the flashlight around, taking in his surroundings with a growing sense of disbelief. The chamber was larger than he'd expected, roughly 12 feet square with concrete walls and a poured concrete floor. But this wasn't just a storm shelter or a simple storage space. This had been designed as living quarters. A narrow cot stood against one wall, its frame rusted but still intact. Beside it, a small table held the remains of candles burned down to nubs. Plastic storage containers were stacked in one corner, and Shane could see what looked like a camping stove and fuel canisters. Someone had lived down here. Not just hidden lived. Shane moved deeper into the chamber, his flashlight revealing more details. Blankets, still folded on the cot, covered in a layer of fine dust. A lantern hanging from a hook on the wall. Books stacked on a makeshift shelf, paperbacks with yellowed pages and cracked spines. Shane picked one up, a Western novel from the early 70s. He set it down and continued his inventory. In the far corner he found a footlocker, military green and secured with a simple clasp. Shane opened it carefully. Inside he found clothes, men's clothes from another era, jeans and flannel shirts, and a heavy canvas jacket. Beneath the clothes, something wrapped in oilcloth. Shane unwrapped it slowly, revealing military equipment, a compass, a canteen, a field manual for basic infantry tactics, dated 1969. His hands were shaking now. Someone with military training had stayed down here, someone his father had hidden. Shane continued searching, finding more evidence of long-term occupation. A portable radio, its batteries long dead. A deck of cards, edges worn from countless shuffles. In one of the storage containers he found canned goods, soup, beans, vegetables, all expired decades ago but still sealed. Another container held medical supplies, bandages, antiseptic, painkillers. Then he found the letters. They were in a metal box, protected from moisture and time. Shane opened the box with trembling fingers and pulled out the first envelope. It was addressed simply to J.C. in feminine handwriting. The postmark read, February 1972. Shane opened it and began to read. "My dearest James," the letter began, "it's been 3 months since you left. I know you can't write back. I know you can't tell me where you are or what you're doing, but I need you to know I'm still here. I'm still waiting. Your mother asks about you every day. I don't know what to tell her anymore. I keep hoping this will all be over soon, that you can come home, and we can start the life we planned." The letter went on, speaking of everyday things, her job at the diner, her sister's upcoming wedding, the weather. But underneath the mundane details, Shane could feel the fear and longing, the weight of separation and uncertainty. He read through more letters, each one building a picture of someone named James, who was in hiding, who couldn't contact his family, who was waiting for something to be resolved so he could return to normal life. The letters spanned from December 1971 to January 1972, each one growing more desperate, more worried. The final letter was different. The handwriting was shakier, the words more urgent. "James, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I have to write it. Your friend Dale came to see me today. He wouldn't tell me where you are, but he said you're safe, that good people are protecting you. He said I need to be patient, that this will all work out. But James, I'm scared. It's been almost 4 months. I need to know you're okay. I need to know you're coming back. Please, if there's any way you can send word, do it. I love you. I'm praying for you every night." There was no date on this letter, but it was clearly the last one in the sequence. Shane sat on the cot, the letters spread around him, trying to make sense of what he'd found. Someone named James, probably James C., based on the initials. Military background, in hiding in early 1972, protected by Shane's father and apparently others, unable to contact his family, desperate to come home. What had happened to him? Shane searched the chamber more thoroughly, looking for any other clues. He found them near the cot, tucked between the frame and the wall, a military dog tag on a chain. Shane held it up to the flashlight, reading the stamped information. Carter, James R. Service number, a long string of digits. Blood type, Opos. Religion, Catholic. Vietnam era, based on the format. Shane turned the tag over, finding nothing else. He slipped it into his pocket and continued his search. Beside the cot, he found a small notebook, its pages filled with handwriting in blue ink. Shane opened it carefully and began to read. It appeared to be a journal, though the entries were sparse and cryptic. December 15, 1971. Arrived. R has made arrangements. Others involved. Can't risk contact. Must wait. The 20th of December 1971. Getting harder. Dreams every night. M doesn't understand why I can't just explain. How do you explain that telling the truth might get you killed? The 3rd of January 1972. Heard they're still looking. Webb won't let it go. R says to be patient. How much longer? The 18th of January 1972. Can't do this anymore. But what choice do I have? The entries stopped after that. Shane flipped through the remaining pages, all blank. Whatever had happened to James Carter after the 18th of January 1972, he hadn't recorded it. Shane climbed back up the ladder, emerging into bright sunlight that made him squint. Duke immediately pressed against him, sensing his agitation. Shane sat on the ground beside the open hatch, processing what he'd discovered. His father had hidden a man named James Carter in an underground chamber for at least 3 or 4 months in 1971 and 1972. Carter had been running from someone named Webb, running from something serious enough that he couldn't risk contacting even the woman who loved him. Multiple people had been involved in protecting him. Carter's journal mentioned others, and the letters referenced a friend named Dale. And then, in January 1972, the trail went cold. No more journal entries, no more letters, just silence and an abandoned chamber sealed beneath layers of rust and concealment. Shane pulled out his phone and searched for James Carter, Vietnam veteran, missing 1972. Nothing immediately relevant came up. He tried variations. James R. Carter, missing person, Carter, Vietnam, Texas, 1971. Still nothing conclusive, though he found several James Carters who'd served in Vietnam. Without more information, he couldn't narrow it down. He was still sitting there, lost in thought, when he heard another vehicle approaching. This time, it wasn't Uncle Carl's pickup. It was a newer sedan, dark blue and well-maintained. Aunt Diane stepped out, her expression severe. "Carl called me," she said without preamble. "Said you were being stubborn about things that don't concern you." Shane stood, brushing dust from his jeans. "Hello to you too, Aunt Diane. Don't be smart with me, Shane. You know what I'm talking about." She gestured toward the open hatch. "You opened it. Against all sense and decency, you opened it. It's on my property. It's your father's secret." Her voice rose, sharp with anger or fear, Shane couldn't tell which. "Raymond sealed that up for a reason. He made us all promise." She stopped abruptly, as if she'd said too much. "Promise what?" Shane pressed. "What did he make you promise?" Diane's mouth pressed into a thin line. She was 70 now, Shane realized, still elegant in her way, but showing the weight of years. And right now, she looked tired and frightened. "He made us promise never to speak of it, never to let anyone dig there, to let the past stay buried where it belongs." "The past." Shane pulled the dog tag from his pocket and held it up. "You mean James Carter, the man Dad hid down there?" Diane's face went pale. "You don't know what you're dealing with. You don't understand." "Then explain it to me. Tell me what happened to James Carter. Tell me why my father built a chamber to hide him. Tell me why this is such a terrible secret that 50 years later, you're all still guarding it." "I can't." Diane's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I promised Raymond. We all did. What he did, what we all did, it was to protect someone. But if it comes out now, if people know, it could destroy everything. His reputation, the family, all of it." Shane felt his frustration building. "Dad's dead, Aunt Diane. Whatever he did, he's beyond consequences now. but I'm standing here in the middle of something I don't understand, and my own family is treating me like a criminal for trying to figure out who my father really was. He was a good man, Diane's voice broke. He was a good man who did what he thought was right. Don't take that away from him. Don't take that away from us. She turned and walked back to her car before Shane could respond. He watched her drive away, the sedan kicking up dust that hung in the air long after she disappeared. Shane looked down at the dog tag in his hand, at the name stamped into metal 5 decades ago. James R. Carter, a man who'd hidden in the darkness, who'd written desperate journal entries, who'd received letters from someone who loved him and waited for him. A man who'd vanished from this chamber and from history, leaving behind only these small traces of his existence. Whatever had happened to James Carter, Shane's father had been at the center of it, and the family had known all of them. They'd kept the secret for 50 years, guarding it even after Raymond's death, treating Shane like an enemy for wanting to understand. Shane descended into the chamber once more, this time with his phone, taking photographs of everything: the cot, the storage containers, the books and supplies. He photographed the letters one by one, careful to capture every word. He documented the journal entries, the military equipment, every detail that might help him piece together the truth. When he emerged again, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Duke waited patiently, and Shane sat beside him, scrolling through the photographs on his phone. Somewhere in these images was the key to understanding what his father had done and why the family was so desperate to keep it hidden. He thought about calling Emma but decided against it. Not yet. Not until he understood more. Instead, he pulled up a search for the county records office. If James Carter had disappeared in 1972, there might be a missing person report, newspaper articles, something official that could give him more information. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he'd go to town and start digging through records. Tonight, he'd stay here with Duke and the open hatch and the weight of questions that grew heavier with each passing hour. As darkness fell, Shane covered the hatch with a tarp and weighted it down with rocks. He didn't want curious animals or curious people investigating before he had answers. Inside the farmhouse, he spread the letters across the kitchen table and read them again, trying to hear the voice of the woman who'd written them, trying to understand what James Carter had meant to her and why he'd chosen to disappear rather than face whatever awaited him in the world above. The last letter haunted him most. "I need to know you're coming back." But Carter hadn't come back, had he? The chamber had been sealed, the journal abandoned, the letters undelivered. Something had happened in January 1972 that had ended whatever protection Raymond Bellamy had offered. Shane fell asleep at the kitchen table, his head pillowed on his arms, surrounded by ghosts and questions, and the growing certainty that his father's carefully constructed silence had been hiding something far more complex than simple family disagreement. When he woke at dawn, stiff and sore, his first thought was of the dog tag in his pocket and the name stamped into it, James R. Carter, a man who'd trusted Shane's father to keep him safe. A man who'd trusted and possibly died for that trust. Shane spent the morning gathering tools and supplies for opening the hatch more thoroughly. He needed proper lighting, better equipment for documenting what he'd found, and something to preserve the fragile papers and photographs that might deteriorate if exposed to air and light after decades in the chamber. But more than that, he needed information. The county courthouse sat in the center of town, a limestone building that had stood for over a century. Shane parked his truck in the visitor lot and sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Duke watched him from the passenger seat, ears perked forward. "I'll be back soon, boy," Shane said, rolling down the windows to give the dog air. Inside, the courthouse was cool and quiet, the kind of institutional silence that made footsteps echo on tile floors. Shane found the records office on the second floor, a room lined with filing cabinets and shelves of bound volumes that stretched back decades. A woman in her 40s sat at the front desk, her nameplate reading Karen Wilson. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking up from her computer. I'm researching property records, Shane said. The Bellamy farm out on County Road 47. I'm trying to understand the history, any permits or construction that might have been done in the early 70s. Karen nodded and stood. That should be straightforward. Let me pull the property file. She disappeared into the rows of filing cabinets and returned a few minutes later with a thick folder. Raymond Bellamy's property. Are you family? His son. Something flickered across her face, recognition perhaps, or sympathy. I'm sorry for your loss. Your father was... She paused, choosing her words carefully. He kept to himself, but people respected him. Shane accepted the folder and took it to a reading table by the window. Inside, he found decades of records. The original deed from 1965, when Raymond had purchased the property, tax records, a permit from 1968 for renovation of the barn, another from 1970 for septic system work, and there, dated November 1971, a permit for underground storm shelter construction. Shane stared at the document. The permit listed Raymond Bellamy as the property owner and a contractor named Walter Hayes as the builder. The shelter was approved for a depth of 12 feet, dimensions of 12 by 12 feet, with proper ventilation and emergency access. Everything legal and documented, except Shane now knew it hadn't been built as a storm shelter. He photographed the permit with his phone, then continued through the records. Nothing else jumped out until he reached the tax assessments. In 1972, the property value had been reassessed, the shelter adding to the overall worth. But there was a note attached, handwritten. Shelter sealed per owner request, not accessible for inspection. When had his father sealed it? And why note that it was sealed unless someone had asked to inspect it? Shane returned the folder to Karen. Thank you. One more thing. Do you have newspaper archives here, or would I need to go to the library? Library has them on microfiche, Karen said. Going back to the 50s, I think. They're usually pretty helpful over there. Shane was turning to leave when he heard a familiar voice behind him. Shane? He turned to find his cousin Melissa standing in the doorway. She was 42, Carl's only daughter, and unlike her father, she'd always had kind eyes. Right now, those eyes were filled with something that looked like concern. Melissa. Didn't expect to see you here. Man. I work here, she said, gesturing to an office behind the front desk. County clerk's office. I saw your name on the visitor log. She glanced at Karen, then back to Shane. Can we talk? Maybe outside? They walked down to the courthouse lawn, finding a bench beneath an old oak tree. Melissa sat with her hands clasped in her lap, and Shane noticed she was nervous, her fingers twisting together. My father called me last night, she said quietly. He's upset about you being at the farm, about you finding... She stopped, looked around to make sure no one was within earshot. About what you found. The chamber, Shane said. Your father knows about it. Your whole family knows about it. Melissa nodded slowly. I didn't, not until I was older, probably your age, actually. My father had been drinking, and he said something about the 70s, about how they'd all done what they had to do. When I pressed him, he told me to forget it. But I could see it weighed on him. What did he say? Exactly? That Raymond Bellamy had helped someone once, that it had been the right thing to do, but it had come with risks. That if certain people found out, there could still be consequences, even now. Melissa met Shane's eyes. He's scared, Shane. I've never seen my father scared before, but he is now. He thinks you're going to expose something that will destroy the family. Shane pulled out his phone and showed her the photograph of the dog tag. James R. Carter. Does that name mean anything to you? Melissa shook her head. No. Who was he? That's what I'm trying to find out. He lived in that chamber for months in 1971 and 1972. My father was hiding him from something or someone. Then he disappeared, and the chamber was sealed. Shane put his phone away. Your father and the others, They know what happened to him. They've known for 50 years. And they're not going to tell you. Melissa's voice was sad but certain. My father made a promise to Raymond. They all did. Whatever happened, they decided it was better to keep it buried. Even if it means lying to me, even if it means I never understand who my father really was. Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised him. Maybe that's what frightens them most, that you will understand who he was, and you'll see him differently. Sometimes people prefer the comfortable lie to the difficult truth. She stood, smoothing her skirt. I can't help you, Shane. Not directly, but I want you to know. She hesitated. I want you to know that whatever you find, I don't think your father was a bad man. I think he was trying to help someone, and maybe it went wrong, and he's been carrying that ever since. Shane watched her walk back into the courthouse, then sat for a while longer, thinking about what she'd said, the comfortable lie versus the difficult truth. His whole life had been built on a comfortable lie that his father was simply cold and distant, that Shane had left because he couldn't connect with a man who wouldn't let him in. But what if the truth was more complicated? What if Raymond's silence hadn't been about emotional unavailability, but about carrying a secret so heavy it had shaped everything else in his life? The library was 3 blocks away, a brick building that had served the town since the 1942. The librarian, an elderly man with thick glasses and a patient demeanor, helped Shane set up at the microfiche reader. What years are you looking for? He asked. 1971 and 1972, January through March of 72 specifically. The librarian retrieved the relevant films and showed Shane how to work the machine. Holler if you need anything else. Shane began scrolling through newspapers from late 1971, scanning headlines and articles. The news was what he'd expect from a small Texas town: local politics, high school sports, agricultural reports. He nearly missed the small article on page 6 of the January 15, 1972 edition. Local veteran reported missing. Shane stopped scrolling and read carefully. James Robert Carter, 24, of rural Prescott County, has been reported missing by his family. Carter, a U.S. Army veteran who served in Vietnam, was last seen in mid-December near his family home. His mother, Patricia Carter, stated that her son had been troubled since returning from military service and may be in need of medical attention. Sheriff's deputies are asking anyone with information about Carter's whereabouts to contact the department. Carter is described as 5'11", approximately 165 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. Shane photographed the article and continued searching. He found 2 more mentions of James Carter. The first, dated the 3rd of February 1972. Search continues for missing veteran. The search for James Carter, missing since mid-December, continues with limited leads. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw stated that investigators have followed several potential sightings but have been unable to confirm Carter's location. The family has offered a reward for information leading to his safe return. Carter's fiancée, Margaret Walsh, issued a statement asking anyone who may have seen Carter to come forward. James is a good man who served his country, Walsh stated. He deserves to come home. The final article was brief, dated the 12th of March, 1972. Missing veteran search, suspended. Local authorities have suspended the active search for James Carter, missing since December 1971. Sheriff Bradshaw stated that despite extensive efforts, no trace of Carter has been found. The case remains open, and the department will investigate any new leads that emerge. Carter's family continues to hope for his safe return. Shane sat back from the screen, his mind working through what he'd learned. James Carter had been reported missing in mid-December 1971, right around the time the journal entries in the chamber had begun. The official story was that he'd disappeared, possibly fled somewhere. But Shane knew the truth. Carter had been in his father's underground chamber the entire time the search was ongoing. Why hadn't Raymond come forward? Why had he let the family suffer, wondering what had happened to their son and brother? Unless Raymond had been protecting Carter from something worse than his family's worry. The journal had mentioned someone named Webb who won't let it go. What if Carter had been running from something so serious that revealing his location would have put him in greater danger? Shane photographed all 3 articles and continued scrolling, looking for any other mentions of Carter or anything that might connect to the story. He found nothing. After March 1972, James Carter simply ceased to exist in the public record, at least in this town's newspaper. He was returning the microfiche to the librarian when he noticed a bulletin board near the front desk. Among the community notices and flyers, one caught his eye. Vietnam Veterans Support Group meets first Thursday, VFW Hall. An idea formed. If Carter had been a Vietnam veteran, and if Dale, the friend mentioned in the letters, had also served, maybe some of the local veterans would remember them. It was a long shot, but Shane was running short on options. Back at the farm, Shane found Duke waiting anxiously by the truck. The dog jumped down and immediately began a circuit of the property, checking for any changes or intrusions. Shane followed at a slower pace, his mind churning through everything he'd learned. James Carter had been a real person, a veteran with family and a fiancée who loved him. He'd been troubled after Vietnam, probably PTSD, though they hadn't called it that in 1972. He'd come to Raymond Bellamy for help and hidden in the chamber for months while authorities searched for him. Then the trail went cold. What had happened between January and March 1972? The journal entries stopped in January, the search was suspended in March, and at some point, Raymond had sealed the chamber, locking away everything Carter had left behind. Shane walked to the location of the hatch, now covered with the tarp. He pulled it aside and descended into the chamber once more, this time with better lighting. He searched more systematically, looking for anything he might have missed. In a corner he hadn't fully explored, he found a metal box similar to the one that had held the letters. Inside were photographs. James Carter, as a young man in uniform, fresh-faced and smiling. Carter, with a young woman, Margaret Walsh, presumably standing in front of what looked like a diner. Carter with 3 other soldiers, all in combat gear, somewhere in Vietnam. And then, tucked beneath the photographs, Shane found something that made his breath catch. A folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, covered in handwriting he didn't recognize. To whoever finds this, my name is James Robert Carter. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and someone finally opened this place up. I need you to know the truth about why I'm here and what happened to me. In August 1969, I witnessed my commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Webb, execute 6 Vietnamese civilians in a village outside Da Nang. When I tried to report it, Webb threatened me. He said if I spoke up, I'd be court-martialed for lying and for conduct unbecoming. He had connections, powerful friends. I believed him. I kept quiet for 2 years, but it ate at me every day. In November 1971, I finally tried to report it through proper channels. Within a week, Webb sent people to find me. I went AWOL rather than face a cover-up or worse. Raymond Bellamy and others helped hide me here. I'm grateful for their protection, but I can't live like this forever. I'm writing this in case something happens to me, in case I don't make it out. Webb is guilty. I saw what he did. Someone needs to know the truth, even if it's 50 years from now. Make sure they know I tried to do the right thing. James R. Carter, the 20th of January 1972. Shane read the note 3 times, his hands shaking. This wasn't just about a missing veteran or a family secret. This was about a war crime, a cover-up, and a young man who'd sacrificed everything to try to tell the truth. And his father had known. Raymond had hidden Carter, protected him, kept him safe while Webb's people searched. But something had gone wrong. The note was dated January 20, and the journal entries had stopped around the same time. What had happened in those final days? Shane climbed out of the chamber and sat in the fading afternoon light, the note clutched in his hand. Duke settled beside him, sensing his distress. The dog's warmth was comforting, grounding Shane in the present, even as his mind spiraled through the past. His father hadn't been hiding a criminal, he'd been protecting a whistleblower, someone trying to do the right thing in the face of institutional corruption and violence. That changed everything, or did it? Because Carter was still gone, the chamber was still sealed, and 5 decades of silence suggested that whatever Raymond had tried to do, it hadn't ended well. Shane pulled out his phone and called Emma. This time, she answered. "Hey, Dad. I need to ask you something. Did Grandpa ever talk to you about Vietnam, about the war, or veterans, or anything like that?" There was a pause. "That's random. Why? Just answer the question, please." "I mean, sometimes." He mentioned he knew guys who'd served. He said once that war changes people, that some of them never really come home, even when they're standing right in front of you. Emma's voice softened. "This is about the farm, isn't it? About whatever you found?" "Yeah, it is." "Did he ever mention a name? James Carter? Or someone named Dale?" "No, I don't think so." "Dad, what's going on? You're worrying me." Shane looked down at the note in his hand, at the neat handwriting of a man who'd been dead or vanished for over 50 years. "I'm trying to understand who your grandfather really was. And I'm starting to think he was a better man than I gave him credit for." "He loved you," Emma said quietly. "He told me that once. Said he wasn't good at showing it, but he did." The words hit Shane harder than he'd expected. He blinked back, unexpected tears. "I wish he'd told me. Maybe he didn't know how. Or maybe—" Emma paused. "Maybe he was carrying something that made it hard to let anyone in." They talked for a few more minutes, the conversation easier than any they'd had in years. When Emma hung up, Shane felt something shift inside him. The anger and resentment he'd carried toward his father for so long were beginning to transform into something else. Understanding, maybe, or at least the desire to understand. That evening, Shane sat on the porch with Duke and Carter's note, watching the sun set over land that had held secrets for longer than Shane had been alive. Tomorrow he'd go to the VFW hall, see if any of the old veterans remembered James Carter or Dale or his father during those years. Someone had to know something. But tonight he let himself sit with the weight of what he'd discovered. His father had been brave enough to protect someone when it mattered, even if it meant living with the consequences for the rest of his life. That was worth something. That was worth knowing. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant against the darkening sky. Duke sighed and rested his head on Shane's knee. And Shane thought about James Carter, wherever he'd ended up, and hoped the young man had found some kind of peace. Morning brought a sense of purpose Shane hadn't felt in years. He woke before dawn, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with Carter's note spread before him. The handwriting was neat, precise, the kind taught in schools before cursive became optional. Shane traced the words with his finger, imagining the young man writing them by lantern light in the underground chamber, knowing he might not survive whatever was coming. After breakfast, Shane decided to search the farmhouse more thoroughly. If his father had hidden Carter, there had to be more evidence, somewhere correspondence, records, something that might explain what had happened after January 1972. He started in Raymond's bedroom, going through the closet more carefully this time. Work clothes, old boots, a jacket Shane remembered from his childhood. On the top shelf, behind a stack of folded blankets, Shane found a metal lockbox. It was secured with a simple combination lock, the kind with 3 numbered wheels. Shane tried his birth year, nothing. His mother's birth year, nothing. He thought for a moment, then tried 1971. The lock clicked open. Inside the box, Shane found papers his father had clearly wanted to keep separate from everyday documents: an old passport, never used, his mother's death certificate, the deed to the farm, and beneath those, a manila envelope marked only with the year 1972. Shane opened the envelope carefully. Inside were several items: a newspaper clipping he'd already seen at the library about Carter's disappearance, a photograph of a military officer, stern-faced, decorated uniform, the name Colonel M. Webb visible on a placard in the background, and most significantly, a letter written in his father's handwriting. The letter was dated February 1972 and addressed to no one, as if Raymond had written it for himself or for posterity. "I've made a decision I pray is the right one. James Carter came to me in December, asking for help. He showed me evidence of what Colonel Webb did in Vietnam, photographs, witness statements, his own testimony. The evidence is real, the crime is real, but so is the danger. Webb has connections that reach into military police, into local law enforcement, even into the community. When James tried to report what he'd witnessed, Webb threatened him with court-martial, dishonor, possibly worse. So James ran, and I helped him hide. Walter, Dale, Frank, and Robert helped too. We built the shelter in November, told everyone it was for storms. By December, James was living there, safe but trapped. We brought him supplies, kept watch, waited for the situation to resolve. But Webb didn't give up. He sent people to look for James. They came to the farm twice, asking questions. I told them I hadn't seen him. I lied to law enforcement. I lied to James's family when they came looking. I watched his mother cry and said nothing. God help me, I had no choice. If I'd told the truth, Webb would have destroyed James and probably come after the rest of us too. But the guilt weighs on me every day. James wrote a final letter last week. He said he can't live like this anymore, hidden away like a criminal, when all he did was try to stop a crime. He said he's going to turn himself in, go public with what he knows, force the system to acknowledge the truth. I tried to talk him out of it. Webb will bury him. But James is determined. He says some things are worth dying for, and truth is one of them. I pray he's right. I pray this doesn't end the way I fear it will. If you're reading this, you know how it ended. You know whether James made it or not. All I can say is I tried. We all tried. Sometimes that has to be enough. The letter wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. Shane sat motionless, processing what his father had written. James Carter had been planning to go public, to expose Webb despite the risks, and based on the fact that the chamber had been sealed and Carter had vanished from history, something had gone terribly wrong. Shane pulled out his phone and searched for Colonel Marcus Webb, Vietnam. The results were immediate and extensive. Marcus Webb had been a decorated officer, recipient of multiple commendations, retired as a brigadier general in 1975. He died in 1998, honored and respected, his obituary praising his service and leadership. No mention of war crimes, no hint of scandal. Whatever Carter had tried to do, it hadn't worked. Shane continued searching through the lockbox and found one more item. A hand-drawn map of the property, with a location marked by an X near the creek, beneath a large oak tree. Beside the X, in his father's handwriting, "Final rest, said prayers, asked forgiveness." Shane's hands went numb. The map was clear, precise. His father had buried something or someone beneath the oak tree by the creek. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Duke looked up from his spot by the door, sensing Shane's agitation. Shane grabbed the map and headed outside, Duke following. The oak tree was ancient, easily over 100 years old, its massive trunk and spreading branches creating a canopy that shaded a wide area. Shane had played here as a child, climbing the lower branches, hiding in the hollow at its base. He'd never known what lay beneath it. He stood now at the base of the tree, holding the map, looking at the ground. The earth here was undisturbed, covered in years of fallen leaves and natural growth. If something was buried here, his father had done it carefully, made it look natural. Shane wasn't ready to dig. Not yet. Not until he understood more. But he took photographs of the location, marked it carefully in his mind, and sat down with his back against the tree trunk. If James Carter was buried here, that meant he'd died on this property. It meant Raymond and the others had concealed a death, committed illegal burial, covered up what happened. Even if they'd done it to protect themselves or to honor Carter's wishes, it was still a crime. Shane's phone rang, startling him. Uncle Carl's name appeared on the screen. Shane considered not answering, then changed his mind. "Hello, Carl. You need to stop." Carl's voice was harsh, strained. "Whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop right now." "I found his letters, Carl. I found the note he left." Silence on the line, long enough that Shane thought Carl might have hung up. Then, "You don't know anything. You've got pieces, fragments. You don't know how it ended. Then tell me." "I can't." "Can't or won't? Both." Carl's voice dropped. "Shane, I've carried this for 50 years. Your father carried it until the day he died. We all did, me, Walter, Frank, Dale, Robert. We made a promise to each other and to James Carter's memory. Some promises don't break just because time passes." "He's buried here, isn't he?" Shane said quietly. "Under the oak tree." Dad left a map. The silence this time was different, heavier. "God damn it," Carl whispered. "God damn it, Raymond. Why'd you write that down? Tell me what happened, Carl. Please. I need to know." "You want to know?" Carl's voice rose again. "You want to know what it's like to watch a good man decide he'd rather die than keep hiding? You want to know what it's like to find him in that chamber with a bullet in his head and a note saying he couldn't let us all go to prison for protecting him? You want to know what it's like to dig a grave in the middle of the night and bury someone you respected, all while his family thinks he abandoned them?" Shane couldn't speak. The image Carl had painted was too vivid, too horrible. "James Carter took his own life," Carl continued, his voice breaking, "the 22nd of January, 1972. Left notes for all of us, thanking us, telling us to let him go. Said Webb had won, said there was no point in all of us going down with him. Your father found him that morning, called the rest of us. We had to make a choice, report it, and face criminal charges for hiding a fugitive, or bury him ourselves and live with the guilt. You chose to bury him. We chose to protect our families, to protect James's family from knowing he'd given up. We let them think he'd run away to Mexico or Canada, let them hope he was alive somewhere. That seemed kinder than the truth." Shane closed his eyes, leaning back against the oak tree. Beneath him, James Carter had been resting for over 50 years, his sacrifice known only to the men who'd tried to help him. "Did you ever try to expose Webb?" Shane asked. "Did you ever try to finish what Carter started?" "Of course we did. Dale tried to go to the press. They wouldn't touch it without Carter's testimony. Walter tried to contact military investigators. They said without the witness, there was no case. We had the evidence. Carter had given it all to your father, but it meant nothing without him." "Where's the evidence now?" Carl hesitated. "Your father kept it. Said someday maybe it would matter, maybe someone would listen. I don't know where he hid it." Shane thought about the chamber, about the military equipment and personal items. "It's probably in the shelter. I haven't finished searching it." "Then you know what you have to do," Carl said. "You have to decide if you're going to expose everything, destroy James's family's peace, ruin your father's memory, potentially face legal consequences yourself, or if you're going to let it stay buried. That's not fair. You're asking me to choose between truth and... I'm asking you to think about the cost. Truth has a price, Shane. Sometimes it's too high to pay." Carl ended the call. Shane sat beneath the oak tree for a long time, Duke pressed against his side, thinking about James Carter and his father, and all the men who'd carried this secret. They'd made their choice 50 years ago, prioritized protection over exposure, mercy over justice. But was that the right choice? And did Shane have the right to unmake it now? That afternoon, Shane returned to the chamber with renewed purpose. If Carter's evidence was here, he needed to find it. He searched every container, every hidden space, every possible location. Finally, in a false panel at the back of the chamber, cleverly concealed and requiring specific pressure points to open, he found what he was looking for. A waterproof military-grade case, sealed and intact. Inside were documents, photographs, and testimony that made Shane's stomach turn. Pictures of dead civilians, their bodies in a ditch. Witness statements from other soldiers describing what Colonel Webb had ordered. A detailed account written by Carter himself, precise and devastating, describing not just the massacre, but Webb's subsequent threats and abuse of power. This was what Carter had died protecting. This was the truth that had been buried along with him. Shane carefully photographed every page, every image, creating a digital record. Then he sealed the case and returned it to its hiding place. He needed time to think, to understand what he should do with this information. Evening found him on the porch again, exhausted and overwhelmed. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Thinking about you. Hope you're okay out there." He replied, "I'm okay, learning a lot about Grandpa, about choices and consequences." Emma's response came quickly. "Good choices or bad choices?" Shane thought about that. Both. Mostly just human choices. He made dinner a simple meal of eggs and toast and shared some with Duke. As darkness fell, Shane sat at the kitchen table and began making notes, trying to organize everything he'd learned. James Carter's timeline, the people involved, the decisions made, the consequences suffered. His father had protected a whistleblower, hidden evidence of war crimes, and ultimately presided over an illegal burial. He'd lied to authorities and to grieving family members. He'd carried the weight of those decisions for over 40 years. But he'd also tried to help someone who had no one else to turn to. He'd risked his own freedom to shelter a man who'd tried to do the right thing. He'd given Carter months of safety and, in the end, a dignified resting place beneath a tree that would stand as his unmarked monument. Raymond Bellamy had been neither purely good nor purely bad. He'd been human, flawed, doing his best in an impossible situation. Shane understood that now, and with that understanding came a kind of peace he hadn't expected. His father's silence, his emotional distance, the walls he'd built, they hadn't been about rejecting Shane. They'd been about protecting him from this burden, from the weight of secrets that could destroy more than they revealed. But now Shane carried the burden, and he had to decide what to do with it. He pulled out his phone and searched for Margaret Walsh, the woman who'd written those desperate letters to Carter over 50 years ago. It took some searching, but he found an obituary from 2019. Margaret Walsh Carter, she'd kept his name, even though they'd never married, had died at 73, survived by 2 children and several grandchildren. So she'd moved on, built a life, found some kind of peace after Carter's disappearance. Revealing the truth now wouldn't bring her closure. It would only reopen old wounds. Shane closed his laptop and sat in the dark kitchen, Duke sleeping at his feet. Tomorrow he'd continue his investigation, keep piecing together the story. But tonight he let himself grieve for Carter, for his father, for all the people touched by decisions made in fear and desperation over 50 years ago. The farmhouse settled around him with its familiar creaks and sighs, and Shane found himself speaking aloud to the empty room, to his father's ghost, to whatever remained of the past in this place. "I don't know what to do, Dad. I wish you were here to tell me. I wish you'd trusted me enough to share this while you were alive." Only silence answered, but somehow that was enough. Dawn arrived with a sense of inevitability. Shane had slept poorly, his dreams filled with images of James Carter writing by lantern light, of his father digging beneath the oak tree, of secrets spreading roots through the soil. He woke before sunrise and made coffee. standing at the kitchen window and watching the land emerge from darkness. Today, he would open the evidence case again and study it more carefully. Today, he would decide what came next. But first, Duke needed his morning walk. Shane pulled on his boots and followed the dog outside, letting Duke set the pace as they circled the property. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and dust. They walked toward the oak tree, and Shane stood beneath its branches, looking down at the ground where his father had marked James Carter's final resting place. Something caught his eye, a glint of metal partially buried in the dirt near the tree's roots. Shane knelt and brushed away soil, revealing a dog tag, not the one he'd found in the chamber. This one was different, worn smoother, as if someone had held it often. He pulled it free and read the inscription. Carter, James R. Same name, same information. But this tag had clearly been handled more, treasured more. Shane turned it over and found an engraving on the back, not military issue. For Margaret, always yours, J. This was the tag Carter had kept, the one he'd held onto through everything. Shane slipped it into his pocket alongside the other one, moved by the intimacy of the gesture. Carter had worn Margaret's promise against his skin, even while hiding in the dark. Shane returned to the farmhouse and descended into the chamber once more. In daylight, filtering down through the hatch, the space looked less ominous but somehow sadder. Evidence of a life interrupted, a sanctuary that had become a tomb of a different kind. He retrieved the waterproof case from its hiding place and brought it up into the sunlight. On the porch, with Duke lying nearby, Shane opened the case and began reading through the documents systematically. Carter's testimony was detailed and damning. On the 15th of August 1969, Carter's unit had entered a village suspected of harboring Viet Cong. Colonel Webb had ordered a search. When the villagers claimed no knowledge of enemy presence, Webb had grown enraged. According to Carter's account, Webb ordered 6 villagers, 3 men, 2 women, and 1 elderly man, lined up and shot. I watched it happen, Carter had written. I was 20 yards away. I heard Colonel Webb give the order. I saw Sergeant Morrison hesitate, then follow through. I saw the bodies fall. Afterward, Webb ordered us to report it as enemy combatants killed in action. He said if anyone contradicted that story, they'd face charges of cowardice and dereliction of duty. The photographs supported Carter's testimony. They weren't professional military documentation, they were hurried shots taken with a personal camera, but they showed bodies in civilian clothing, no weapons visible, positioned in a way that suggested execution rather than combat. There were also statements from 2 other soldiers who'd witnessed the incident. Both had signed their names, both had corroborated Carter's account. Shane recognized one of the names, Dale Chen. That must be the Dale mentioned in the letters and in Carl's confession. The case also contained Carter's attempts to report the crime through official channels. Letters to his commanding officer, requests for investigation, formal complaints, and documented responses. Denials, threats, orders to cease making false accusations. Finally, a letter from a military lawyer warning Carter that continued pursuit of unsubstantiated claims could result in court-martial for conduct unbecoming and making false official statements. The system had failed him completely. Every door Carter had tried to open had been slammed in his face. No wonder he'd run. Shane's phone rang. Melissa's name appeared on the screen. Shane, I need to see you. Can I come to the farm? Of course. When? I'm already on my way. I'll be there in 20 minutes. She arrived in a small sedan, parking next to Shane's truck. When she stepped out, Shane could see she'd been crying. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged. My father collapsed last night, she said without preamble. He's okay, the doctors say it was stress and exhaustion, but he was talking in his sleep at the hospital. Talking about 1972, about James Carter, about things I'd never heard before. Shane led her to the porch, and they sat on the steps. Duke approached and rested his head on Melissa's knee, offering comfort. What did he say? That they buried him. That your father said the prayers because none of them knew what else to do. That James had left notes for all of them, forgiving them, thanking them, asking them to move on. Melissa wiped her eyes. My father's been carrying this guilt for 50 years, Shane. It's eating him alive. The doctors say the stress might have caused the collapse. Shane pulled out the dog tag he'd found that morning and showed it to Melissa. I found this near the oak tree. James Carter was engaged to a woman named Margaret Walsh. He had this engraved for her. Melissa held the tag gently, reading the inscription. He loved her. Yes, and she never knew what really happened to him. She died thinking he'd abandoned her or died somewhere alone. The family let her believe that rather than tell her the truth. Was that wrong? Melissa's question was genuine, searching. Would it have been kinder to tell her he'd taken his own life? That he'd given up? Shane had been wrestling with the same question. I don't know. Maybe there's no right answer. Maybe they did the best they could with impossible choices. Melissa returned the dog tag. I don't know that either. I have Carter's evidence. I have proof of what Colonel Webb did. I could release it, try to get justice even now. Webb's dead. I know. But the truth still matters, doesn't it? Carter died trying to expose this. Doesn't he deserve to have his story told? At what cost? Melissa echoed her father's words. Shane, if you go public with this, you'll destroy more than just Webb's legacy. You'll expose your father and all the men who helped hide Carter. They could face legal consequences. Their families will be affected. My father's already fragile. This might break him completely. Shane looked out over the property, the land his father had worked and protected and used to shelter a desperate young man. So I'm supposed to just rebury it all? Let Carter stay forgotten? I'm not saying that. I'm saying... Melissa paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm saying maybe there's a way to honor Carter's memory without destroying everyone else. Maybe the truth doesn't have to be all or nothing. They sat in silence for a while, Duke moving between them, seeking attention from both. Finally, Melissa stood. My father wants to talk to you. When he's feeling better, he said there are things you need to know, things that weren't in the letters or the evidence. Will you come see him? Of course. After Melissa left, Shane returned to the evidence case. Among the documents, he found a letter from Dale Chen to Carter, dated December 1971. It provided context Shane hadn't had before. James, I know you're struggling down there. I know this isn't the life you wanted. But Webb has people everywhere. I've heard rumors he's contacted local law enforcement, told them you're AWOL and dangerous. He's spinning a story that you had a breakdown, that you're unstable. If you surface now, you'll be arrested and buried so deep no one will ever hear your testimony. Raymond and the others are keeping you safe. I know it's hard, but please hold on a little longer. I'm working on getting your evidence to someone who can't be intimidated. There's a journalist in Houston who's built a career on exposing military corruption. If I can get him the evidence without revealing where you are, maybe we can bypass Webb's protection. Stay strong, brother. This isn't forever. So they'd been working on a plan, trying to find a way to expose Webb while keeping Carter safe. Something must have gone wrong, must have made Carter lose hope before Dale could make the connection. Shane spent the afternoon reading through everything again, making notes, building a timeline. By evening, he had a clearer picture of what had happened. December 1971. Carter arrives at the farm, moves into the underground chamber. January, Raymond and the others supply Carter, keep watch, while Dale tries to find a trustworthy journalist. Mid-January. Something happens, maybe Webb gets too close, maybe Carter hears something that convinces him the plan won't work. January 20. Carter writes his final testimony, the note explaining what he'd witnessed. January 22. Carter takes his own life. January 23 or later, Raymond and the others bury him beneath the oak tree, seal the chamber, agree to maintain silence. The pieces fit together now, creating a tragedy Shane could finally understand. These weren't villains or heroes, they were people caught in circumstances beyond their control, making decisions they thought were right or at least survivable. His father had been trying to help, it just hadn't been enough. That evening, Shane tried calling Emma but got voicemail. He left a message. "Hey, sweetheart, I'm okay, still working through things here. I've been thinking a lot about choices people make, about how sometimes there are no good options, just less bad ones. I know I've made choices you didn't agree with. The divorce, the distance, not being there the way I should have been. I want you to know I was trying, in my own broken way, just like Grandpa was trying. Anyway, I love you. Call me when you can." He ended the call and sat on the porch as darkness fell. Duke settled beside him, the dog's steady presence a comfort. Shane thought about Margaret Walsh, who'd waited for a man who would never return, about Dale Chen, who'd tried to find a way to expose the truth, about his father, who dug a grave in the night and said prayers over a young man's body. And he thought about James Carter, 24 years old, decorated veteran, engaged to be married, who'd seen something terrible and tried to make it right, only to find that the system he'd served was more interested in protection than justice. "I'll find a way," Shane said aloud, to Carter's ghost, to his father's memory, to the night air. "I'll find a way to honor what you tried to do." Duke lifted his head, looking at Shane with dark, understanding eyes. And for the first time since he'd arrived at this farm, Shane felt like he had a purpose beyond just clearing land and selling property. He had a mission, to find a way to tell Carter's story without destroying the people who'd tried to help him. The question was how. The next morning, Shane drove to the hospital where Carl was recovering. Melissa met him in the lobby, looking tired but relieved. "He's better today," she said. "The doctors want to keep him another night for observation, but he's alert and talking. He asked for you specifically." Carl's room was on the 3rd floor. Shane found his uncle sitting up in bed, connected to monitors that beeped steadily. At 73, Carl looked every year of his age today, his face grey and drawn. "Shane," Carl's voice was weak but steady. "Sit down, we need to talk." Shane pulled a chair close to the bed. Melissa excused herself, giving them privacy. "I'm sorry," Carl began, "for how I've treated you since you came back, for the hostility, the warnings. You had every right to know the truth. You were protecting Dad's memory. I understand that now." Carl shook his head. "I was protecting myself. My own guilt. Your father Raymond carried it better than the rest of us. He accepted what we'd done, made peace with it somehow. Me, Walter, Frank, Dale. We've all been running from it in our own ways." "Tell me what happened," Shane said gently. "The whole story, not just the parts I've pieced together." Carl took a deep breath and began. "It started in November 1971. Dale Chen came to your father, said he had a friend in trouble, James Carter. They'd served together in Vietnam, same unit. Dale told Raymond about the massacre, about Webb's threats, about how Carter had tried to do the right thing and been punished for it. Your father didn't hesitate. He said we'd help." "Who's we?" "Me, your father, Walter Hayes, Frank Morrison, and Dale. We'd all known each other since high school. We'd seen some of our classmates come back from Vietnam, changed, broken. We understood what the war did to people. So when Dale said James needed help, we all agreed." Carl shifted in the bed, wincing slightly. "We built the shelter in November, got all the permits proper so no one would ask questions later. Made it look like we were just preparing for storms, which was reasonable for that area. By early December, James was living down there. We took turns bringing supplies, keeping watch. Your father did most of it since it was his property." "What was Carter like?" A sad smile crossed Carl's face. "Young, earnest. He felt guilty about hiding, felt like he was putting us all at risk, but he was also terrified. He'd seen what Webb could do, knew the man wouldn't stop until he'd silenced anyone who threatened his reputation. James showed us the evidence, the photographs, the testimony. It was clear Webb had committed murder and covered it up. Dale mentioned a journalist, someone who might help. Right. Dale had a contact, guy named Mitchell, who'd exposed some military procurement fraud a couple years earlier. Dale was working on getting the evidence to him without revealing James's location. We thought if we could get the story out there, public enough that it couldn't be buried, James could come forward safely. Carl paused, his expression darkening. But things started going wrong in January. Webb's people came to town asking questions. They talked to the sheriff, showed him a photo of James, said he was AWOL and potentially dangerous. The sheriff, Tom Bradshaw, you might remember him, he was a good man, but he believed what they told him. He put out a missing person report, started asking around. They came to the farm? Twice. Military police, accompanied by local deputies. Your father told them he hadn't seen James, which was technically true. James was underground, so Raymond hadn't seen him that day. But the pressure was building. James could hear the vehicles coming and going. He knew they were close. Carl's monitors beeped faster, and he took a moment to breathe deeply, calming himself. January 20. James told your father he couldn't do it anymore. Said he was going to turn himself in, face whatever consequences came. Raymond tried to talk him out of it, told him to wait just a little longer. But James was done waiting. He said hiding felt like admitting guilt, like giving Webb what he wanted. What happened 2 days later? Carl's eyes filled with tears. Your father went to bring James his morning supplies. Found him. His voice broke. James had used a pistol he'd brought with him, left notes for all of us. Said he couldn't let us all go to prison for protecting him. Said Webb had won, and he was tired of fighting. Asked us to tell Margaret he loved her, but couldn't face her, knowing he'd failed. Shane closed his eyes, imagining his father's horror at finding Carter's body. Raymond called us immediately. We came to the farm, all of us, stood around that chamber arguing about what to do. Dale wanted to report it, let the truth come out. Frank worried about the legal consequences. We'd hidden a fugitive, lied to law enforcement. Walter pointed out that James's suicide would be used to discredit his testimony, make him look unstable. So you decided to bury him. We decided to protect James's memory and our families. We buried him that night, beneath the oak tree. Your father said prayers. We each said something. Thanked James for his courage, promised we'd never forget. Then we sealed the chamber, hid the entrance, and agreed to never speak of it. And Margaret? We let her believe he'd run away. It seemed kinder than telling her he'd given up. She mourned, eventually moved on, got married to someone else. We heard she lived a good life. Carl reached out and gripped Shane's hand, his fingers cold and trembling. Your father carried that weight until he died. He never forgot James. Every year on January 22, he'd spend the day alone, wouldn't talk to anyone. I think he went to the oak tree, paid his respects. The guilt never left him. Did you ever try to expose Webb? Dale did. After we buried James, Dale sent the evidence to that journalist anonymously. But without Carter to testify, without a living witness, the story went nowhere. Mitchell told Dale he couldn't publish unverified accusations against a decorated colonel. The evidence alone wasn't enough. Webb got away with it. Webb retired with full honors, lived to be 93, died respected and decorated. That's the part that haunts us most. James died for nothing. The truth stayed buried, just like he did. They sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Carl spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I know what you're thinking, Shane. You're wondering if you should finish what James started. Release the evidence. Expose Webb, even now. Shouldn't I? I can't tell you what to do. But I can tell you this, there's a cost to every choice. Expose the truth, and you'll damage your father's reputation, possibly face legal trouble yourself. We all committed crimes, hiding James and burying him. The statute of limitations might protect us, but maybe not. And for what? Webb's dead. Justice delayed 50 years isn't really justice. What about James's family? Don't they deserve to know what really happened? Maybe, or maybe they've made peace with not knowing. Sometimes closure just means reopening old wounds. Shane thought about Margaret Walsh's obituary, how she'd kept Carter's name all those years. I found something this morning, another dog tag, engraved for Margaret. He must have dropped it near his gravesite before it happened. Carl closed his eyes. He was thinking of her at the end. That's something, at least. I need to think about this, Shane said, standing. Thank you for telling me the truth. Shane. Carl opened his eyes, meeting Shane's gaze directly. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. I'm tired of running from this. If you think exposing everything is right, do it. I'll face the consequences. Shane left the hospital with his mind churning. He drove back to the farm, taking the long route, needing time to think. Duke greeted him eagerly when he arrived, and Shane took the dog for a long walk around the property, ending up beneath the oak tree. He sat with his back against the trunk, Duke beside him, and pulled out both dog tags. The official one, and the one meant for Margaret. 2 small pieces of metal, all that remained of James Carter's presence in the world above ground. Shane's phone buzzed. Emma was calling. Hey, sweetheart. Dad, I got your message. Are you okay? You sounded, I don't know, different. I'm okay. Just learning things about Grandpa, about choices he made that I'm only now understanding. Good things or bad things? Both. Complicated things. Shane paused. If you learned something about me, something that changed how you saw me, would you want to know? Even if the truth was difficult? I always want the truth, Dad, even when it's hard. Emma's voice was firm, certain. Secrets just hurt people in the end. Her words struck him. Secrets just hurt people in the end. Carter had tried to expose a secret and died for it. Raymond had kept a secret and carried guilt for 40 years. The family had maintained a secret and poisoned their relationships with fear and suspicion. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe the only way forward was through truth, regardless of the cost. Thanks, sweetheart. That helps. Are you going to tell me what this is about? Soon. I promise. I need to figure some things out first. After they hung up, Shane returned to the farmhouse and spread out all the evidence on the kitchen table. Carter's testimony, the photographs, the witness statements, his father's letters, the journal entries, everything that told the story of James R. Carter and his attempt to do the right thing. And Shane made a decision. Not the final decision that would take more thought, more consultation, but a first step. He called Melissa. Does your father know any journalists? Anyone trustworthy who covers military history or war crimes? I think so. Why? Because I want to tell James Carter's story. But I want to do it right, in a way that honors him, without unnecessarily damaging the people who tried to help him. Melissa was quiet for a moment. That's a narrow path to walk, Shane. I know. But I have to try. Carter tried to expose the truth and died for it. The least I can do is finish what he started, but maybe with a little more wisdom about the collateral damage. Give me a day. I'll ask my father for names, do some research. There might be a way to focus on Webb's crimes without exposing all the details of how Carter's evidence survived. After hanging up, Shane felt something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Maybe there was a way forward. Maybe the truth could be told without destroying everyone in its path. He spent the evening organizing the evidence, creating a clear narrative of what had happened in Vietnam in 1969, how Carter had tried to report it, how the system had failed him. He deliberately left out details about the underground chamber, about the hiding, about the burial. Those parts of the story belonged to his father and the men who'd helped, and Shane wasn't ready to expose them yet. The story he was building focused on James Carter as a whistleblower, on Colonel Webb as a war criminal, on a system that had protected the guilty and punished the honest. That story could be told without revealing everything. At least, Shane hoped it could. That night, sitting on the porch with Duke, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky, Shane spoke aloud to the night, to Carter's ghost, to his father's memory. "I'm going to try to get you justice, James. It's 50 years late, but maybe that's better than never. And Dad, I hope you understand. I hope this is what you'd want. You kept Carter's evidence all these years for a reason. You wanted it to matter someday." Duke lifted his head and howled softly, a mournful sound that carried across the empty land, and Shane sat beneath the stars, holding the dog tags that represented two lives intertwined by tragedy and choice, and believed he was finally on the right path. 3 days after his hospital visit with Carl, Shane was working in the barn when he noticed something he'd missed before. The hatch lid, which he'd left propped open for ventilation, had something attached to its underside, a sealed envelope, yellowed with age and secured with weatherproof tape. His heart racing, Shane carefully removed the envelope. On the front, in his father's distinctive handwriting, "To my son, if you're reading this, you've earned the truth." Shane sat down heavily on an overturned bucket, Duke pressing against his legs. He opened the envelope with shaking hands and pulled out several pages of lined notebook paper covered in his father's neat script. "Shane," the letter began, dated just 6 weeks before Raymond's death. "I knew you'd come back. I knew you'd find this. You're stubborn like me, and curious like your mother. Those are good qualities, even when they lead you into difficult territory. By now, you've found the chamber. You've found James Carter's evidence, his letters, maybe even figured out where he's buried. You're probably angry at me for keeping this secret, for building walls between us that you couldn't understand. I want you to know that was never about you. It was about protecting you from a burden I had no right to place on your shoulders. But you're here now, and you've chosen to dig deeper, so you deserve to know everything, not just what happened, but why, and what it cost, and what it meant." James Carter came to me in December 1971, brought by Dale Chen, who'd served with him in Vietnam. I'd known Dale since we were kids, good man, honest, the kind who'd take a bullet for a friend. When he told me James needed help, I didn't ask many questions, just said yes. That's something I learned from my own father, your grandfather. Sometimes the right thing is obvious and you just do it. No debate, no hesitation. James needed protection from a corrupt system that cared more about reputation than justice. So I built him a hiding place and kept him safe. The shelter was ready by early December. James moved in with supplies for several months. We thought it would be short-term, a few weeks, maybe 2 months, while Dale worked on getting James's evidence to someone who could use it. But things got complicated. Colonel Webb, the man James had witnessed committing murder, had powerful friends, military brass, politicians, even some local law enforcement. When James went AWOL, Webb didn't just file paperwork and move on. He sent people to find James, real people, dangerous people, men who understood that loose ends needed to be tied off permanently. They came to the farm twice in January 1972, military police accompanied by deputies. They had authority, legal standing. If they'd found James, they'd have taken him, and he'd have disappeared into the system, court-martial for desertion, maybe worse. Webb would have made sure James's testimony never saw daylight. I lied to them, Shane. I looked law enforcement officers in the eye and lied. I'm not proud of it, but I'd do it again. Sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing, and you have to choose which one matters more. James struggled down there in the dark. He was young, only 24, and he'd already seen too much. The massacre in Vietnam haunted him. The weight of hiding, of putting good people at risk to protect him, crushed him. I could see it happening, watch him deteriorate every time I brought supplies. But what could I do? Tell him to surface and face Webb's retaliation. Dale was working on a plan. He'd contacted a journalist named Richard Mitchell who'd exposed military corruption before. Dale was going to give Mitchell the evidence anonymously, let the story break without revealing James's location. Once it was public, James could come forward safely, add his testimony to an existing investigation. But James ran out of patience. On the 20th of January 1972, he told me he was done hiding, said he was going to turn himself in, force the system to acknowledge what he'd witnessed. I tried to talk him out of it, told him to wait just a little longer. He seemed to agree. 2 days later, I found him dead. Shane had to stop reading for a moment, overwhelmed by the image of his father discovering Carter's body. He took several deep breaths before continuing. James had left notes for all of us, me, Carl, Walter, Frank and Dale. His note to me said, "Raymond, you tried to save me, but some things can't be saved. I'm tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. Webb won, and I can't face a future where injustice wins. Thank you for trying. Take care of Margaret somehow if you can, and don't let my death be for nothing. Keep the evidence. Someday it might matter." We buried him that night beneath the oak tree, said prayers, marked the location, sealed the chamber. We made a pact. Never speak of it, never reveal what we'd done, protect James's memory and our families. But Shane, here's what I need you to understand. James didn't kill himself because he was weak or broken. He killed himself because he was strong and principled and couldn't live in a world where telling the truth got you destroyed, while committing murder got you decorated. I've carried that with me every day since. The weight of watching a good man lose hope, the guilt of not being able to save him, the anger at a system that drove him to that choice. And I kept his evidence. All of it. The photographs, the testimony, the witness statements. I kept it because James asked me to, because he believed it might matter someday. Now you have it, and you have to decide what to do with it. I can't tell you what's right, Shane. I made my choice 50 years ago, and I've lived with the consequences. Some days I think I did the right thing. Other days I wonder if I should have forced James to surface, to fight, even if it meant losing. At least he'd have been alive. But I can tell you this, James Carter was a hero. He saw evil and tried to stop it. He paid the ultimate price for his integrity. Whatever you decide to do with his story, make sure people know that. Make sure his name means something more than just missing veteran or casualty of war. The evidence is complete, I made sure of that. Everything James collected, every witness statement, every photograph that proves what Colonel Webb did. It's all preserved in the chamber, in the waterproof case you've probably already found. Webb is dead now, died in 1998, honored and decorated, his crimes buried with him. But maybe that's not the end of the story. Maybe justice can still matter, even 50 years later. I'm writing this because I'm dying, Shane. Cancer. The doctors say 6 months, maybe less. I haven't told anyone yet, not Carl, not the family. Just me and the doctors, and this letter. I wanted to tell you about James myself, sit you down and explain everything, but I ran out of courage. Some burdens are easier to carry alone, and I convinced myself you were better off not knowing. I was wrong about that. Like I was wrong about a lot of things. I kept you at a distance all your life. I know that hurt you. I know it drove you away. But Shane, I want you to understand, it wasn't because I didn't love you. It was because I loved you so much, I couldn't bear to risk pulling you into the darkness I carried. Every time I looked at you, I saw potential. I saw someone who could build a life free from the weight of secrets and guilt. I didn't want to contaminate that with my choices. But you came back. You found what I hid. And maybe that means you're stronger than I gave you credit for. Maybe you can do what I couldn't, find a way to honor James's sacrifice without destroying everyone else in the process. If you decide to expose everything, I'll understand. The truth matters. Justice matters. Don't let concern for my reputation stop you from doing what's right. But if you decide to bury it all again, I'll understand that too. Sometimes protecting the living is more important than vindicating the dead. Whatever you choose, know this. I'm proud of you. I'm proud you came back. I'm proud you're asking hard questions and refusing easy answers. That's who your mother and I raised you to be, even if I lost sight of it along the way. There's more you should know. The map I drew showing James's grave, that's not the only thing buried on this property. 3 feet west of the oak tree, 2 feet down, you'll find a metal box. Inside is James's personal journal, the one he kept before everything happened. His thoughts, his hopes, his relationship with Margaret. It's private, intimate. I couldn't bear to leave it in the chamber, but I couldn't destroy it either. So I buried it near him, kept them together in a way. If you contact James's family, if there's anyone left who remembers him, maybe give them the journal. Let them know who he really was, beyond the war and the hiding and the ending. And, Shane, one more thing. Forgive me. For the distance, for the silence, for not being the father you needed. I did the best I could with the man I was. I hope that's enough. Your father always, Raymond. Shane sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. Duke whined and pressed closer, offering comfort. The letter trembled in Shane's hands as he read it again, absorbing every word. His father had known he was dying, had known Shane would come back, had deliberately left the evidence, and this letter, trusting Shane to make the right choice. And there was more, a journal buried near Carter's grave, a piece of the man's life before tragedy consumed him. Shane folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket. He walked to the oak tree, counting 3 feet west from where his father's map had marked the grave. He began digging, and 2 feet down, his shovel struck metal. The box was sealed with wax, protected from moisture and decay. Inside, Shane found a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but readable. He opened it to the first entry. January 1968, shipped out today. Margaret came to see me off. She wore the blue dress I like, cried when she thought I wasn't looking. I promised her I'd come back safe. I hope I can keep that promise. Shane closed the journal, unable to read more right now. This was James Carter before the war, before Webb, before the hiding and the darkness. This was a young man in love, hopeful about the future, not yet broken by what he'd witnessed. Shane carried the journal back to the farmhouse and sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by evidence and letters and the weight of decisions he still had to make. His father had given him everything, the truth, the evidence, the choice. Now Shane had to figure out what to do with it all. He pulled out his phone and called Melissa. I found another letter from my dad. He knew I'd come back. He knew I'd find everything. He left it all for me to decide. That's a lot of responsibility. Yeah. Shane looked at the journal on the table. But I think I know what to do. I need to talk to Dale Chen. Is he still alive? I think so. I can find out. Do that. And Melissa? My dad was dying when he wrote this letter. He knew he had cancer. Did he ever tell your father? Not that I know of. Dad never mentioned it. He carried that alone, too. Just like he carried everything else alone. After hanging up, Shane opened the journal again and began reading. James Carter's early entries were full of life observations about military training, jokes about fellow soldiers, loving descriptions of Margaret and their plans for after the war. Then the entries shifted. Vietnam changed the tone. Carter wrote about fear, boredom, camaraderie, and increasingly, doubt about the mission and the methods being used. And finally, the entry Shane had been dreading. The 15th of August, 1969. I saw Colonel Webb kill 6 people today. Civilians, no weapons, no threat. He just lined them up and ordered us to shoot them. Most of the unit refused at first, but Webb made it clear, follow orders or face court-martial. Sergeant Morrison finally did it. I watched those people die, knowing I could have stopped it, should have stopped it, but I was afraid. I'm still afraid. What kind of soldier does that make me? What kind of man? The entries after that were darker, filled with guilt and self-recrimination. Carter struggled with what he'd witnessed, wrestled with whether to report it, feared the consequences of speaking up. The final entry was dated November 1971. I can't carry this anymore. I have to tell someone, have to try to make it right. Dale says he knows people who can help. I'm going to report what Webb did, whatever the cost. Margaret deserves a man who stands up for what's right. I owe those dead villagers the truth. I owe myself the chance to be someone better than the coward who watched them die. Shane closed the journal and sat in the gathering darkness. James Carter hadn't been perfect. He'd witnessed a crime and initially said nothing, paralyzed by fear and military hierarchy. But he'd found his courage eventually, tried to do the right thing, even knowing the cost. That was worth remembering, that was worth honoring. Shane's phone rang. Melissa. I found Dale Chen. He's 86, living in a veteran's home about an hour from here. I called and explained who you are. He wants to meet you tomorrow. Thank you. Shane, my father told me what your dad's letter said, about the cancer, about knowing you'd come back. Your father trusted you with this. That means something. I'm not sure I'm worthy of that trust. You came back, didn't you? You could have sold the property without ever opening that hatch. You could have covered it back up when you first found it. But you didn't. You kept digging until you understood. That's exactly what your father hoped you'd do. After they hung up, Shane sat with Carter's journal and his father's letter, two documents separated by 50 years, but connected by tragedy and choice. Tomorrow he'd meet Dale Chen, hear another piece of the story. But tonight, he let himself grieve for all of them. Carter, his father, the men who'd tried to help, the woman who'd waited for a man who would never come home. Duke settled at his feet, and Shane reached down to scratch the dog's ears. We're going to make this right, boy. Somehow, we're going to make this right. The farmhouse settled around them with its familiar sounds, and Shane sat in the darkness, holding pieces of the past, trying to build a bridge to justice that wouldn't collapse under the weight of all the people it would affect. His father had trusted him with this choice. Shane was determined not to fail that trust. Shane barely slept that night. He lay awake, thinking about his father's letter, about James Carter's journal, about the decisions that had rippled through 50 years and landed in his lap. By dawn, he'd made a plan, not a complete one, but a starting point. He would meet with Dale Chen and hear the full story from someone who'd known Carter personally. Then he would decide how to proceed, what to reveal, and what to protect. The evidence would be shared, but carefully, in a way that honored Carter without unnecessarily destroying the men who'd tried to help him. At 8 that morning, Shane loaded Duke into the truck and began the drive to the veteran's home where Dale Chen lived. The facility was modern and well-maintained, set back from the road with landscaped grounds. Shane checked in at the front desk, and a nurse led him to a sunroom where an elderly Asian man sat in a wheelchair, looking out over a garden. "Mr. Chen, you have a visitor." Dale turned, and Shane was struck by the sharpness still present in the old man's eyes. At 86, Dale was thin and frail, but his gaze was alert and assessing. "You're Raymond's boy," Dale said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "Shane Bellamy. Sit down. Tell me what you found." Shane sat in the chair beside Dale's wheelchair and pulled out his phone. He showed Dale photographs of the chamber, of Carter's evidence, of the letters and journal entries. Dale studied each image carefully, his expression unreadable. Finally he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been waiting 50 years for someone to find that. Hoped Raymond would tell the truth before he died. Guess he couldn't quite bring himself to do it. But he told you, in his way, left it all for you to discover. I found his letter, the one explaining everything. Everything. Dale smiled sadly. I doubt Raymond told you everything. That man carried secrets like other people carry keys, always more than you'd expect, always close to the chest. Tell me what he left out. Dale took a deep breath and began. James Carter saved my life in Vietnam, literally took a bullet that was meant for me. We were under fire, pinned down, and James threw himself in front of me without thinking. The bullet went through his shoulder, should have gone through my skull. We were brothers after that. The kind of bond that doesn't break. So when James told me about Webb, about the massacre, I believed him immediately, and when he decided to report it, I supported him, even though I knew it was dangerous. Webb was brass, connected, the kind of officer who could make problems disappear. James tried going through proper channels first, filed reports, requested investigations, followed procedure. They stonewalled him at every turn, told him to stop making accusations, threatened him with court-martial if he persisted. Finally, someone we never figured out who tipped Webb off that James was pushing for an investigation. That's when things got dangerous. Webb contacted James directly, told him to drop it or face consequences. James refused. Within a week, James was being followed. His mail was intercepted. People started asking questions about his mental state, planting the seeds that he was unstable, suffering from combat stress. James knew what was coming. He'd be declared unfit, committed to a psychiatric facility, his testimony discredited before he could give it. So he ran, went AWOL and came to me. Dale paused, his hands shaking slightly. Shane waited patiently. I brought him to Raymond because I knew your father could be trusted. Raymond had that quality, solid, unshakable. If he gave his word, he kept it. We built the shelter, moved James in, and I started working on Plan B. The journalist, Richard Mitchell, was my contact. I'd met him years before, knew he had integrity and wasn't afraid of powerful people. I gave him some of the evidence, enough to interest him, but he needed more. He needed James's direct testimony, needed to verify the photographs and witness statements. I was trying to arrange a secure meeting, somewhere Webb's people couldn't track, but it was slow going. Mitchell had to verify what I'd given him, had to research Webb's background, had to build a case strong enough that his editors would approve publication. All of that took time. James ran out of patience. Dale's voice broke. I went to see him 3 days before he died. He told me he couldn't do it anymore, couldn't keep hiding while good people risked everything for him. I tried to convince him to hold on, told him we were close to breaking the story, but I could see he'd made up his mind. Did you know he was planning to kill himself? No. Dale wiped his eyes. If I'd known, I would have stayed with him, would have done something. But James was careful. He didn't want us to stop him. The notes he left, they were his way of setting us free, telling us it was okay to move on. But it wasn't okay, was it? No. We all carried it. Raymond, most of all. He found James, had to see what that young man did to himself. That image, it haunted your father until the day he died. Shane showed Dale the photograph of Colonel Webb he'd found in his father's lockbox. Did you ever try to go after Webb directly? Dale's expression darkened. I tried. After we buried James, I was furious. I wanted revenge, wanted justice, wanted Webb to suffer the way James had suffered. I sent the evidence to Mitchell anonymously, pushed him to publish. But without James's testimony, without a living witness, it wasn't enough. Mitchell said he couldn't publish unverified allegations against a decorated officer. I tried going to other journalists, to military investigators, to anyone who might listen. Everyone gave me the same response: not enough evidence, too risky, too many potential legal problems. Webb's reputation was too solid, his connections too strong. Eventually I gave up. Webb retired with honors, lived a long, comfortable life, and died respected. James's sacrifice meant nothing. Maybe not nothing, Shane said quietly. I have all the evidence. I have James's testimony, the photographs, the witness statements. I have my father's account of what happened. Times have changed. People are more willing to listen to stories about military corruption and cover-ups. Maybe it's not too late. Dale studied Shane for a long moment. You're thinking about going public. I'm thinking about finishing what James started. But I need your help. I need you to tell me the complete truth, everything that happened, everyone who was involved. And I need your testimony, your willingness to go on record. I'm 86 years old, Shane. What can they do to me now? They could charge you with obstruction, with helping hide a fugitive, with concealing a death. Let them try. Dale's voice was firm. I'm ready to tell the truth. I've been ready for 50 years. I want James's name cleared. I want people to know he was a hero, not a deserter or a casualty of mental illness. Shane pulled out Carter's journal and showed it to Dale. My father buried this near James's grave. It's his personal journal from before and during Vietnam. I think his family should have it. Dale took the journal with trembling hands and opened it to a random page. He read silently, tears streaming down his face. This is James. This is who he was before the war broke him, before Webb destroyed him. Does he have family left? Anyone who would want to know the truth? His sister Margaret, different Margaret than his fiancée, she might still be alive. She'd be in her 80s now. And his fiancée, Margaret Walsh, she got married eventually, had children. They'd want to know. Dale closed the journal carefully and handed it back to Shane. Do it right, Shane. Tell James's story completely. Don't sanitize it. Don't make him into a perfect hero. He was a real person, flawed and frightened and brave. That's what made his sacrifice meaningful. He was terrified, but he tried anyway. They talked for another hour, Dale filling in details Shane hadn't known, the names of the other soldiers who'd witnessed the massacre, the specific mechanisms Webb had used to threaten Carter. The night they'd buried Carter beneath the oak tree, how each man had said something, how Raymond had prayed for James's soul and forgiveness for their deception. When Shane finally stood to leave, Dale gripped his hand with surprising strength. Your father was a good man, better than most. He carried that burden so the rest of us could sleep at night. Don't let anyone tell you different. Shane drove back to the farm with his mind churning. He had everything he needed now, the evidence, the testimony, the complete story. But how to tell it? How to honor Carter without destroying everyone else? Back at the farmhouse, he found Emma sitting on the porch steps with Duke beside her. Shane's heart jumped. He hadn't known she was coming. Em, what are you doing here? She stood and hugged him, holding on longer than usual. Your messages worried me. You kept saying cryptic things about Grandpa and choices and truth. I took a personal day and drove out. Shane led her inside and made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, and Shane spread out everything, his father's letter, Carter's journal, the evidence from the chamber. This is what I've been dealing with, he said. This is what Grandpa kept secret for 50 years. Emma read through the documents silently, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to sadness. When she finished, she looked up at Shane with tears in her eyes. Grandpa was protecting him. He was trying to help. Yes, but he also lied, concealed evidence, buried a body illegally. He broke laws, Em, to save someone from injustice. That's different, is it? Legally, morally, where's the line? Emma was quiet for a moment, thinking, you're going to tell this story, aren't you? You're going to expose what Colonel Webb did. I'm thinking about it, but it means exposing Grandpa too, exposing all the men who helped. It means potentially facing legal consequences, damaging reputations, hurting people. What would James Carter want? Emma asked. If he were here, what would he tell you to do? Shane pulled out Carter's final note, the one he'd left in the chamber. He read aloud, "Make sure they know I tried to do the right thing." "There's your answer," Emma said softly. He wanted people to know he tried. He wanted his sacrifice to mean something. "You have to tell the story, Dad, not just for him, but for Grandpa too. Let people see that Raymond Bellamy was brave enough to protect someone when it mattered." Shane realized his daughter was right. The story wasn't just about Carter or Webb or war crimes. It was about ordinary people faced with extraordinary choices, about the grey areas where law and justice diverge, about the cost of standing up for what's right. That evening, Shane called Melissa and asked her to arrange a meeting. Everyone who was involved, Carl, Walter, Frank, Dale, if he can travel. "We need to talk about going public, about what it means and what the risks are, and we need to make a collective decision." 2 days later, they gathered at the farm. Carl came with Melissa's help, still weak, but insisting on being present. Walter Hayes, now 84, arrived, leaning on a cane. Frank Morrison, 82, came with his wife. Dale Chen made the trip despite his frailty, determined to be part of whatever came next. They sat in the farmhouse living room, these old men who'd carried a secret for half a century, and Shane laid out his proposal. "I want to tell James Carter's story. I want to expose what Colonel Webb did and why Carter died, but I want to do it in a way that honors what you all tried to do. Not as criminals who covered up a death, but as people who protected someone from a corrupt system." Carl spoke first. "What about the legal risks? I've consulted with a lawyer. The statute of limitations on most of what happened has expired. You could face some exposure, some scrutiny, but likely no criminal charges. What about Raymond's reputation?" This from Walter. "What about how people will remember him? I think people will remember him as brave, as someone who stood up when it mattered. Yes, he broke laws, but he broke them for the right reasons." Frank cleared his throat. "What about James's family? What about Margaret? I plan to contact them first, before anything goes public. Give them James's journal, explain what really happened, let them decide if they want to be part of the story." The men looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Dale spoke. "I'm ready. I've been waiting 50 years to tell the truth. Let's finish what James started." Scene One by one, the others agreed. Carl's agreement came last, hardest, but with a sense of relief Shane could see in his uncle's face. "We do this together," Carl said. "All of us. Share the responsibility, share the consequences." That night, after everyone had left, Shane sat on the porch with Emma and Duke, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You're really going to do this," Emma said. "You're going to change everything. I'm going to try to make something right. I don't know if it'll work, but I have to try." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Dad, and I think Grandpa would be proud too." Shane thought about his father's letter, the final line, "Whatever you choose, know this, I'm proud of you." Raymond Bellamy had trusted him with this decision, had believed Shane was strong enough to handle it. Shane was determined not to fail that trust. Tomorrow he would start the process, contacting Margaret Walsh's family, reaching out to journalists, preparing to tell a story 50 years in the making. Tonight, he sat with his daughter under the stars, grateful for her presence, and whispered a prayer to the night air. "I'm going to get you justice, James. And Dad, I'm going to show the world who you really were. Both of you deserve that much." Duke sighed contentedly. Emma's breathing grew steady and calm, and Shane felt peace settle over him for the first time since he'd opened that hatch. The path forward was clear now. All he had to do was walk it. The morning brought determination and nervous energy in equal measure. Shane woke before dawn, dressed carefully, and reviewed his notes one final time. Today was the beginning, the first step toward exposing what had been hidden for 5 decades. His first call was to the law firm that specialized in military justice and war crimes investigations. The attorney, Janet Rodriguez, had been recommended by Melissa after extensive research. Shane had already sent her preliminary information. Today, they would discuss strategy. Mr. Bellamy. Janet's voice was professional but warm. I've reviewed the materials you sent. This is significant, potentially explosive from a historical perspective. Can we move forward? Is there enough evidence? The evidence is remarkably complete. Carter's photographs, testimony, and witness statements combined with your father's documentation and Dale Chen's willingness to testify create a compelling case. But you need to understand what you're opening up. I'm ready. Colonel Marcus Webb has been dead since 1998, so there can't be criminal prosecution. But we can pursue several paths, requesting a posthumous investigation by the Department of Defense, seeking to have Webb's honors and decorations revoked, and potentially getting recognition for James Carter as a whistleblower. What about the men who helped hide him? Janet paused. That's more complicated. Technically, they committed multiple crimes, harboring a fugitive, concealing a death, illegal burial, but the statute of limitations has expired on most charges. More importantly, given the circumstances, I doubt any prosecutor would pursue charges. Public sentiment tends to favor whistleblowers and those who protect them, especially in cases involving military corruption. So we can move forward? I'll prepare a formal complaint to the DoD War Crimes Office. It'll take time, these investigations move slowly. But yes, we can move forward. After hanging up with Janet, Shane made his second call, this one more difficult. He'd tracked down James Carter's niece, Sarah Carter Williams, who lived in Austin. She was the daughter of Carter's sister, Margaret, who had passed away in 2015. Shane had sent her a carefully worded email explaining who he was and asking to meet. She'd agreed, cautiously. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Austin that afternoon. Shane made the drive with Duke, his nerves increasing with each mile. How do you tell someone their uncle, dead for 50 years, had actually been a hero whose sacrifice had been buried? Sarah was waiting at a corner table when Shane arrived. She was in her mid-50s, with graying hair and her uncle's same serious brown eyes. Shane recognized James Carter in her features, a genetic echo across time. Mr. Bellamy? She stood to shake his hand. Thank you for meeting me, and please, call me Shane. They sat, and Shane pulled out a folder containing copies of documents carefully selected to tell Carter's story without overwhelming her immediately. My father died recently, Shane began. When I was clearing his property, I found evidence that he'd been hiding your uncle in 1971 and 1972. Sarah's eyes widened. Hiding him? From what? Shane explained carefully, laying out the story. The massacre Carter had witnessed, Colonel Webb's cover-up and threats, Carter's attempts to report the crime, his eventual flight, and the shelter Raymond had built for him. My mother searched for him her whole life, Sarah said quietly, tears streaming down her face. She never stopped hoping he'd come back. When she died, she still believed he was out there somewhere. I'm sorry. Your uncle, he tried. He tried to do the right thing, and the system failed him. Shane showed her Carter's journal, and Sarah clutched it like it was sacred. She read passages aloud, her voice breaking. This is his handwriting. These are his words. She looked up at Shane. How did he die? Please tell me the truth. Shane told her about the suicide, about Carter's final notes, about the decision the men had made to bury him beneath the oak tree rather than reveal what had happened. Where is he buried? On my father's property, beneath a oak tree by the creek. It's peaceful there, private. My father, he said prayers, tried to honor your uncle's memory. Can I see it? Of course. Whenever you're ready. They talked for 2 more hours. Sarah asked questions, cried, grew angry at the system that had failed her uncle, and finally found a kind of peace in knowing the truth. What happens now? She asked. I'm working with an attorney to get your uncle recognized as a whistleblower, to expose what Colonel Webb did, to make sure people know James tried to do the right thing. Will you expose my uncle's—" She couldn't say suicide. "The way he died. Only if you're comfortable with that. The story can focus on his heroism, on what he witnessed and tried to report. The circumstances of his death are private, family information, unless you want them public." Sarah thought for a long time. "I think they should know. I think people should understand the cost of speaking truth to power, what it does to a person when the system crushes them instead of listening. My uncle's death is part of his story. It doesn't diminish his courage, it shows how much he sacrificed." Shane felt relief and respect for this woman he'd just met. "Thank you. That means a lot. When can I see where he's buried?" "Tomorrow. If you'd like, I'll meet you there." After saying goodbye to Sarah, Shane drove back to the farm, feeling both emotionally drained and purposeful. The hardest conversation was done. Sarah understood, supported what Shane was trying to do, wanted her uncle's story told. That evening, Shane received an email from Janet Rodriguez. She'd connected him with a journalist named Patricia Morgan, who specialized in military history and war crimes. Patricia had won awards for her investigative work on Vietnam-era atrocities. If anyone could tell Carter's story properly, it was her. Shane called Patricia immediately. She answered on the second ring. "Mr. Bellamy, Janet briefed me on your situation. I'd like to come see the evidence in person, interview you and anyone else willing to talk. This could be an important story. How soon can you come? Tomorrow afternoon?" They made arrangements, and Shane hung up, feeling the momentum building. Everything was aligning: the attorney, the family, the journalist. James Carter's story was going to be told. That night, Shane couldn't sleep. He walked outside with Duke and stood beneath the oak tree where Carter was buried. In his pocket, he carried both dog tags, the official one and the one meant for Margaret Walsh. "Tomorrow your niece comes to visit," Shane said aloud to Carter's ghost. "Day after that, a journalist who'll tell your story right. We're going to get you justice, James, finally, after all these years." Duke sat beside him, and Shane reached down to scratch the dog's ears. The night was clear, stars brilliant overhead, and Shane felt his father's presence somehow, approving of what was about to happen. The next morning, Sarah arrived with her husband and 2 teenage children. Shane met them at the gate and led them to the oak tree. He'd placed flowers there that morning, simple wildflowers from the property. "This is where my father buried him," Shane said quietly. "He chose this spot because it was peaceful, because the tree would stand as a living monument." Sarah knelt at the base of the tree, her children flanking her. Her husband hung back respectfully. They stayed for nearly an hour, talking softly, crying, processing. Shane gave them privacy, walking back to the house to wait. When they finally returned, Sarah hugged Shane tightly. "Thank you for telling us. Thank you for not letting him stay forgotten. Your uncle deserves to be remembered as a hero. I'm going to make sure that happens." That afternoon, Patricia Morgan arrived with recording equipment and a photographer. She was in her 50s, professionally dressed, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Shane led her through everything: the chamber, the evidence, Carter's journal and letters, his father's confession. Patricia recorded hours of interviews with Shane, then with Dale Chen, who'd agreed to come back to the farm. She photographed the chamber, the oak tree, the evidence laid out on Shane's kitchen table. "This is remarkable," Patricia said finally. "The completeness of the documentation, the corroborating testimony, the physical evidence. And your father's letter. That's the emotional core that makes this human, rather than just historical. When will you publish?" "I need to verify everything independently, check military records, confirm Webb's service history, locate the other witnesses if possible. But if everything checks out, I'd say 6 to 8 weeks for the full investigative piece. With your permission, I'd like to do a series 3 long-form articles covering the massacre, the cover-up, and the men who tried to help Carter." Whatever serves the story best. Over the next 2 weeks, Shane's life became a blur of interviews, document reviews, and coordination. Patricia worked with meticulous care, verifying every detail. Janet Rodriguez filed the formal complaint with the DoD War Crimes Office, including all of Carter's evidence and requesting a posthumous investigation. Carl, Walter, and Frank each gave interviews to Patricia, telling their parts of the story. Their courage in coming forward despite the risks moved Shane deeply. These old men, unburdening themselves after 50 years, finding relief in truth-telling. Emma stayed at the farm during this period, helping Shane organize documents and providing emotional support. Their relationship, strained for so many years, strengthened through the shared purpose. "You're doing the right thing, Dad," she said one evening as they sat on the porch. "Grandpa would be proud." Shane looked out over the land, the property he'd planned to sell but now couldn't imagine leaving. "I think I'm going to keep the farm. Fix it up, maybe turn it into something that honors both of them, Dad and James Carter." "Like what?" "A veterans' retreat, maybe. A place where people dealing with moral injury or PTSD can come to heal. Keep the chamber as a memorial, tell Carter's story, use it to help others." Emma smiled. "That's perfect. That's exactly what Grandpa would want." 3 weeks after Patricia's first visit, she sent Shane an advance copy of her first article. He read it on his laptop at the kitchen table, tears streaming down his face. Patricia had captured everything: Carter's courage, Webb's crimes, the impossible position Carter had been placed in, and Raymond Bellamy's decision to help despite the risks. The article painted Shane's father not as a criminal but as a moral man faced with an immoral system, someone who'd chosen humanity over law. "Your father comes across as a hero in this," Emma said, reading over Shane's shoulder. "That's good. That's how he should be remembered." The next day, Janet called with news. "The DoD has agreed to open an investigation. It's preliminary, but they're taking it seriously. They've assigned a team to review Carter's evidence and cross-reference it with other reports from that period. If they confirm what Carter documented, they'll move forward with formal findings. How long will that take? Months, possibly years. Military bureaucracy moves slowly. But Shane, this is significant. They're actually investigating. That's more than Carter ever got when he was alive." Shane felt something shift inside him, a release of tension he hadn't known he was carrying. So justice is possible, even 50 years later. Justice is always possible. It's just a question of whether we're brave enough to pursue it. That evening, Shane gathered everyone at the farm one final time before Patricia's article published. Carl and Melissa, Walter and his wife, Frank and his children, Dale Chen, Sarah Carter Williams, and her family, Emma, and Shane himself. They stood together beneath the oak tree at sunset. "Tomorrow the story goes public," Shane said. "The world is going to learn about James Carter, about Colonel Webb, about what all of you did to help. I want to thank you for your courage, both then and now." Dale spoke up, his voice trembling but strong. "James was my brother, not by blood but by bond. He saved my life, and when he needed help, I should have been able to save his. I couldn't. But now, 50 years later, we're giving him something: recognition, honor, truth. That has to count for something." Carl added, "Raymond carried this burden so the rest of us could sleep. He was the strongest among us, and we all owe him a debt. Shane, by doing this, you're honoring your father's memory in the best possible way." Sarah approached the tree and placed a photograph against its trunk. James Carter in his dress uniform, young and hopeful. "Uncle James, we finally know what happened to you. We finally understand your sacrifice. Rest in peace." They stood together in the fading light. This unlikely coalition of family and friends and strangers, bound by a 50-year-old secret, finally being brought to light. And Shane felt his father's presence, felt James Carter's spirit, felt the weight of the past beginning to lift. Tomorrow the story would break. Tomorrow the world would know. But tonight, they stood together beneath the oak tree and honored two men who'd tried to do what was right, whatever the cost. Patricia Morgan's first article published on a Sunday morning. Shane woke early and refreshed his browser obsessively, waiting for it to go live. When it finally appeared, he read through it 3 times, checking every detail, making sure Patricia had honored her promise to tell the story faithfully. The headline read, "The Whistleblower Who Vanished: How a Vietnam Veteran Died Trying to Expose War Crimes." The article was powerful, meticulously documented, and devastating in its implications. Patricia laid out Colonel Webb's crime in clear detail, used Carter's photographs and testimony to paint an undeniable picture of what had happened in that Vietnamese village in 1969. She quoted from Carter's journal, letting his own words convey his moral struggle and determination. And she told the story of Raymond Bellamy and the other men who tried to protect Carter, framing their actions not as crimes, but as acts of conscience in the face of institutional failure. By midday, the article had gone viral. Major news outlets picked it up, military historians weighed in, veterans advocacy groups issued statements. The story resonated because it touched on themes that transcended the specific incident: the cost of whistleblowing, the failure of systems to protect those who speak truth, the moral complexity of breaking laws to serve justice. Shane's phone rang constantly, reporters requesting interviews, veterans wanting to share their own stories of military corruption, historical researchers asking for access to the evidence. It was overwhelming and gratifying in equal measure. That afternoon, Shane received a call from the Department of Defense. A Colonel Hendricks from the War Crimes Office wanted to discuss the investigation. "Mr. Bellamy, we've reviewed the evidence you provided through your attorney. It's substantial and credible. We're moving forward with a formal investigation into the allegations against Colonel Webb." "What does that mean exactly?" "We'll be conducting a comprehensive review of Webb's service record, interviewing surviving witnesses if we can locate them, and examining other reports from that period to see if there are corroborating incidents. If our investigation substantiates what Carter documented, we'll issue formal findings and recommendations." "Recommendations for what?" "Webb's dead, posthumous revocation of honors and decorations, official acknowledgement of wrongdoing, possibly reparations to the families of the victims if we can locate them, and recognition for Specialist Carter as a whistleblower who tried to report serious crimes through proper channels." Shane felt his chest tighten. Recognition for Carter, that's what he wanted. Based on what we've seen so far, he deserves it. His documentation was professional and thorough. He followed procedure. The system failed him catastrophically. After the call, Shane walked outside to the oak tree. He sat with his back against the trunk, Duke beside him, and called Sarah. "They're investigating. The DOD is actually investigating Webb, and they're talking about recognizing your uncle as a whistleblower." Sarah's voice broke. "My mother would have. She would have been so proud. All those years she searched for him, hoping he was alive somewhere. At least now we know he was brave. He was trying to do something important." Over the next few days, more articles appeared. Patricia's second piece focused on the cover-up, detailing how Webb had used his connections to suppress Carter's allegations and threaten anyone who tried to help. The article named names, cited documents, and built an irrefutable case that institutional corruption had protected a war criminal and destroyed a whistleblower. The third article, published a week later, told the story of Raymond Bellamy and the men who'd hidden Carter. Patricia had interviewed all of them extensively, and their accounts painted a picture of ordinary people faced with an impossible moral choice: obey laws that protected evil or break laws to protect someone trying to expose that evil. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Editorial boards praised Raymond and the others. Veterans groups called them heroes. Legal scholars debated the ethics of civil disobedience in the face of institutional failure. But there was backlash too. Some military officials defended Webb, claimed the allegations were unproven. Conservative commentators questioned why these old accusations were being dredged up now. Webb's surviving family issued a statement calling the articles a smear campaign against a decorated officer who can't defend himself. Shane weathered it all, focusing on the growing support for Carter and the men who'd helped him. What mattered most was that the truth was out there, documented and public, impossible to bury again. 6 weeks after Patricia's first article, the DoD released preliminary findings from their investigation. Shane read the report with Emma and Dale at the kitchen table. The key findings: based on photographic evidence, witness testimony, and specialist Carter's detailed documentation, this investigation finds credible evidence that Colonel Marcus Webb ordered and oversaw the execution of 6 Vietnamese civilians on the 15th of August 1969. The subsequent cover-up and threats against Specialist Carter represent serious violations of military code and ethical standards. Specialist James Robert Carter acted properly in attempting to report these crimes. His allegations were ignored and actively suppressed. The retaliation he faced represents a systemic failure to protect whistleblowers and ensure accountability. This office recommends 1. Posthumous revocation of Colonel Webb's military honors related to his Vietnam service. 2. Official recognition of Specialist Carter as a military whistleblower. 3. Formal apology to the Carter family. 4. Review of current whistleblower protections to prevent similar failures. Shane set down the report, unable to speak. Dale was crying openly, his shoulders shaking. "We did it," Dale whispered. "We finally did it. James got justice." Emma hugged Shane tightly. "Grandpa helped make this happen. He kept the evidence. He left it for you to find. He knew someday someone would listen." That evening, Shane called Sarah and read her the DoD findings. She listened in silence, then asked quietly, "Can we give Uncle James a proper burial now? With military honors?" "I'll make it happen," Shane promised. Over the next months, Shane worked with the DoD and Arlington National Cemetery to arrange for Carter's remains to be exhumed, identified, and reinterred with full military honors. Sarah and her family were involved in every decision, choosing readings and music and who would speak. The ceremony was scheduled for a cool October morning, 18 months after Shane had first opened the hatch and discovered his father's secret. The day before the ceremony, Shane visited the oak tree one final time before Carter's exhumation. The excavation team would arrive tomorrow to carefully recover the remains, treating them with the dignity and respect they'd always deserved. Shane placed his hand on the tree trunk and spoke aloud. "You're going to Arlington, James. You're going to be honored as a hero. Everyone will know what you tried to do." That night, Shane couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed in the farmhouse, the same house where his father had lived and died, the same property where James Carter had hidden and eventually given up, and thought about the strange path that had led him here. He'd come back to clear a property and sell it, to close a chapter on a relationship with his father that had never fully existed. Instead, he'd found a story that changed everything. His understanding of Raymond, his sense of purpose, his relationship with Emma, his place in the world. The next morning, the excavation team arrived with ground-penetrating radar and careful protocols. Shane, Sarah, and Dale watched from a respectful distance as the team worked. By afternoon, they'd carefully recovered Carter's remains, placing them in a flag-draped coffin with full honors. Sarah placed the dog tag Shane had found, the one engraved for Margaret, into the coffin before it was sealed. "You kept her close all these years. Now you can rest." The journey to Arlington took 2 days. Shane, Emma, Sarah and her family, Dale, Carl, Walter and Frank, all made the trip. They stayed in hotels near the cemetery, preparing for the ceremony that would finally bring closure to a 50-year journey. The morning of the ceremony was clear and cold. They gathered at the gravesite, a plot in a section reserved for veterans who'd made extraordinary sacrifices. Military honor guards stood at attention, A chaplain waited to begin. Sarah had asked Shane to speak, to tell the story of how they'd found her uncle and what Raymond Bellamy had tried to do. Shane stood before the gathered crowd, family, reporters, veterans, DOD officials, and spoke from his heart. James Carter was 24 years old when he witnessed a crime that would define the rest of his short life. He could have stayed silent. Many did. But James believed in justice, believed in doing what was right, even when it cost him everything. My father, Raymond Bellamy, tried to protect James. He built a shelter, risked his own freedom, did everything he could to keep James safe while working to expose the truth. It wasn't enough. Sometimes courage and good intentions aren't enough against systems designed to protect the powerful. But James's sacrifice wasn't meaningless. The evidence he gathered, the testimony he provided, the courage he showed, all of it mattered. It took 50 years, but justice finally came. Colonel Webb's crimes are now documented and acknowledged. James is recognized as a whistleblower and a hero. My father carried the weight of James's death until his own death 40 years later. He never forgot, never stopped honoring the young man who'd trusted him. By leaving the evidence for me to find, by trusting me to make it public, my father ensured that James's story would be told. Today, we lay James Carter to rest with the honors he earned and deserves. Today, we remember that speaking truth to power requires extraordinary courage, and that sometimes the cost of that courage is everything. Today, we say that James Carter's life and death mattered, that he made a difference, that he will not be forgotten. The ceremony continued with military precision. The honor guard performed their duties flawlessly. Taps was played, clear and mournful in the cold air. The flag was folded and presented to Sarah, who clutched it to her chest and wept. As they lowered the coffin into the ground, Shane felt his father's presence somehow, felt Raymond's approval of what Shane had accomplished. The burden Raymond had carried alone for 40 years was finally shared, finally resolved. After the ceremony, a DOD official approached Shane with a wooden box. The Secretary of Defense asked me to present this to Specialist Carter's family posthumously. It's a commendation for integrity and courage in the face of adversity. It's not a medal of honor, but it's our way of acknowledging what he tried to do. Shane accepted the box and presented it to Sarah. She opened it to find a certificate and medal, officially recognizing James R. Carter as a military whistleblower who'd attempted to report war crimes and paid the ultimate price for his integrity. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "Thank you for giving us back our uncle, for making sure people know who he really was." That evening, the group gathered for dinner at a restaurant near Arlington. The mood was somber but also relieved. The weight of 50 years of secrets finally lifted. Dale raised his glass in a toast. To James Carter, who never stopped fighting for what was right, and to Raymond Bellamy, who tried to protect him. Both of them were better men than most of us can hope to be. They drank, and Shane felt tears on his cheeks but didn't wipe them away. For acknowledging loss and sacrifice and the complicated paths people walk trying to do what's right. Carl spoke next, his voice steady despite his age and frailty. "I've carried guilt for 50 years. Wondering if we made the right choice. Today, sitting here, I finally have peace. We did our best. We tried to help. And Shane finished what we couldn't. He got James justice. That has to count for something." Walter and Frank nodded in agreement. And Shane looked around the table at these old men who'd carried a secret for half a century, who'd risked exposure to finally tell the truth, and felt profound respect for all of them. Emma sat beside Shane, her hand on his arm. "You did good, Dad. You made Grandpa's sacrifice mean something. You gave that soldier the honor he deserved." Shane squeezed her hand, grateful beyond words that she'd been part of this journey, that they'd rebuilt their relationship through this shared purpose. As they left the restaurant, Shane stepped outside into the cold night air and looked up at the stars. Somewhere in Arlington, James Carter rested beneath a headstone that named him a hero and whistleblower. somewhere beyond this world. Raymond Bellamy knew his son had honored the promise he'd kept for 40 years. The story was told, the truth was known. Justice, delayed by half a century, had finally arrived. And Shane Bellamy, who'd come home to sell a property and settle an estate, had instead discovered his purpose: to honor those who tried to do right, to ensure that courage was remembered, and to prove that truth, no matter how long buried, could still break free into light. 18 months after the ceremony at Arlington, Shane stood on the porch of the farmhouse and surveyed the changes he'd made. The property looked nothing like the overgrown ruin he'd found when he'd first arrived. The barn had been repaired and converted into a community space. The fields had been cleared and planted with native grasses. The house itself had been renovated while maintaining its character, updated but still recognizably the home where Raymond Bellamy had lived and worked. Most significantly, the underground chamber had been preserved and transformed into a memorial space. Visitors could descend the ladder and see where James Carter had lived for those desperate months in 1971 and 1972. The walls now held photographs and documents telling his story, explaining what he'd witnessed, what he'd tried to do, and ultimately what it had cost him. The memorial had opened 6 months ago, and veterans from around the country had made pilgrimages to see it. They came to honor Carter, but also to reflect on their own experiences with moral injury, with witnessing things that haunted them, with the weight of choices made in impossible circumstances. Shane had partnered with several veterans organizations to create retreat programs on the property. Vets dealing with PTSD, moral injury, or the difficult transition back to civilian life could come stay for a week or two, work the land, talk with counselors and peers, and find some peace in the quiet Texas landscape. Duke had become something of a mascot for the place, offering comfort to visitors who needed a friendly presence that asked nothing of them but allowed them to simply be. Emma visited regularly, had even moved back to Texas and taken a job with a non-profit that served veterans. Shane's relationship with his daughter had been completely restored, built now on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than guilt and distance. "Dad, we've got a bus coming in an hour," Emma called from inside the house. 20 veterans from the VA program in Austin. "I'll be ready," Shane called back. He walked to the oak tree, as he did most mornings, and stood for a moment in contemplation. A bronze plaque now marked the spot where Carter had been buried for 50 years. James Robert Carter, 1947 to 1972. Specialist, U.S. Army. Whistleblower and hero. Make sure they know I tried to do the right thing. Beside it, a second plaque. Raymond Michael Bellamy, 1941 to 2024. Who protected those who spoke truth to power? Shane had arranged for his father's ashes to be interred here, beneath the tree, near the man he'd tried so hard to save. It seemed right that they rest together, their stories forever intertwined. A car pulled into the driveway, and Shane recognized Sarah Carter Williams and her family. They visited regularly, had become extended family in the way that shared experience creates bonds stronger than blood. "Shane!" Sarah's teenage daughter ran to hug him. The girl had become fascinated with her great-uncle's story, had even written a school report about whistleblowers and moral courage that had won a state competition. "How's everyone?" Shane asked, as Sarah and her husband approached. "Good. We brought lunch, thought we could eat under the tree if that's okay." "Perfect." They settled in the shade, and Sarah pulled out a letter. "I wanted to share this with you. It's from Margaret Walsh's daughter. You remember Margaret was Uncle James's fiancée?" Shane nodded. Margaret had died in 2019, never knowing what had really happened to the man she'd loved. Her daughter reached out after reading the articles. She wanted me to know that her mother kept a box of James's letters until the day she died. She'd read them sometimes, remember him as he'd been before the war. Knowing the truth now, even though her mother didn't live to learn it, has given the family closure. "I'm glad," Shane said quietly. Sarah looked toward the house, where more visitors were beginning to arrive. "You've built something important here, Shane. This place helps people heal. That's a legacy your father would be proud of." Throughout the afternoon, Shane gave tours, shared the story, answered questions. Each group of visitors brought their own experiences, their own struggles, their own need to understand how good people navigate moral complexity. One veteran, a woman in her 40s who'd served in Iraq, stood in the chamber for a long time, reading Carter's journal entries. When she emerged, her eyes were red. "I witnessed something in Fallujah," she told Shane quietly. "My unit. She couldn't finish. I tried to report it, but they told me I was misremembering, that combat stress was affecting my judgment. They made me doubt my own memory." "Did you keep trying?" Shane asked gently. "No. I gave up. Let them bury it. But it's eaten at me every day since." Shane showed her the memorial plaque, pointed out the line about Carter trying to do the right thing. "You tried too. That matters. The system failed you, just like it failed him. But trying matters." The woman nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." As evening fell and the last visitors departed, Shane sat on the porch with Emma and Duke. The property was quiet again, peaceful in the way that comes from purposeful work well done. "I heard from the publisher today," Emma said. "They're moving forward with the book about Uncle James and Grandpa. Patricia Morgan is going to write it." "That's good. The story deserves to be more than just articles." "They want you to write the foreword. Will you?" Shane considered. "I think so. I want people to understand that these weren't simple choices, that my father wasn't perfect, but he tried to help someone when it mattered. That's worth remembering." His phone buzzed with a text from Carl. The old man had recovered from his health scare and was doing well, finally at peace after unburdening himself of the secret he'd carried so long. The text read, "Coming by tomorrow with Walter. Want to see the new group of veterans." Shane smiled. Carl and the others visited regularly, volunteered with the programs, shared their own stories when appropriate. They'd found purpose in helping others navigate moral complexity, in showing that imperfect people could still make meaningful choices. Later that evening, alone on the porch with Duke, Shane pulled out his father's letter and read it again. He'd read it dozens of times now, but certain passages still hit him hard. "Whatever you choose, know this. I'm proud of you." Shane folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into his pocket. His father had trusted him with an impossible choice, and Shane liked to think he'd honored that trust. The truth was told, justice was served, and something good had come from tragedy. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant against the darkening sky. In the distance a coyote called, its voice carrying across the empty land. Duke lifted his head, listening, then settled back down with a contented sigh. Shane thought about James Carter, about his father, about all the people whose choices had led to this moment. None of them had been perfect. All of them had struggled with decisions that had no clear right answer. But they'd tried, and that mattered. The farmhouse lights glowed warm behind him. Inside, Emma was preparing dinner, humming to herself, comfortable in this place that had once held only painful memories for Shane. They'd made something new here, built something meaningful from the ruins of secrets and silence. Tomorrow, more veterans would come, seeking the same thing Carter had sought: understanding, peace, a place where their struggles made sense and their choices were acknowledged without judgment. Shane would welcome them, share the story, offer what comfort he could. But tonight, he sat beneath the stars with his dog and thought about legacy, not the simple kind that comes from success or wealth, but the complicated kind that comes from trying to do right in a world that makes that impossibly hard. His father had left him more than property. Raymond had left him a story about courage and consequence, about the price of integrity and the weight of choice. He'd left him a mission: to honor those who try, even when they fail, and to create spaces where people could wrestle with moral complexity without shame. Shane was doing that now, building something that mattered, helping others find peace, showing that even 50 years late, truth could break through and justice could be served. The night deepened, and Shane remained on the porch, comfortable with the quiet, at peace with the past, and hopeful about the future. Duke's steady breathing, the distant sounds of the land, Emma's voice calling him to dinner, all of it felt right, felt like home in a way this place never had before. He stood finally, stretching stiff muscles, and walked inside to join his daughter for dinner. Behind him, the oak tree stood silhouetted against the stars, a monument to two men who'd tried to do the right thing, and a reminder that their sacrifices had not been in vain. Some stories take 50 years to tell, some truths take generations to emerge. But they matter, all of them, because they remind us that ordinary people faced with extraordinary circumstances can choose courage over comfort, truth over silence, and that those choices echo forward through time, changing lives they'll never know about. Shane Bellamy had learned that lesson, and now, in this place where secrets had been buried and then freed, he was teaching it to others, one veteran, one story, one moment of understanding at a time. The farmhouse door closed behind him, and through the window the light spilled out onto the porch where he'd sat for so many evenings, wrestling with his father's legacy and his own choices. Inside, Emma had set the table. They sat together, father and daughter, and talked about their day, about plans for the property, about the veterans coming tomorrow. Simple conversation, the kind Shane had once thought impossible between them. But they'd been through something together now, had walked through fire and come out changed. Emma understood her grandfather in a way she never had before, and Shane had learned that love sometimes looks like silence, that protection can take forms we don't recognize until we're older. After dinner, Shane stood at the kitchen window, looking out toward the oak tree, barely visible in the darkness. He whispered words he'd spoken often in the past year and a half. "Thank you, Dad, for trusting me, for leaving me the tools to make this right. And James, thank you for your courage. Your story mattered then, and it matters now. Rest easy, both of you." Duke appeared at his side, and Shane reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Emma came to stand with him, and together they looked out into the darkness where history rested but no longer haunted. Tomorrow would bring new visitors, new stories, new opportunities to help others find peace. But tonight, Shane Bellamy stood in the home his father had built, on land that had held secrets and pain, and felt nothing but gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. The story was told, the truth was known, and from tragedy and silence, something good had grown, a place of healing, a monument to courage, and a reminder that it's never too late to do the right thing, to honor sacrifice, and to ensure that those who tried to speak truth are finally heard.